The guy was lying in a small wooden house right on the floor. Apparently he became ill and he fainted. He just woke up and everything around him was spinning, or rather, he was very dizzy. He saw an unfamiliar place for himself and thought, where is he? He barely got up and, looking out the window, thought he could hear birds singing. He was still not feeling very well. And then I noticed that there was a mirror hanging on the wall, and I came closer to him in order to look at myself. But what he saw surprised him greatly, or rather plunged him into a strong shock. He asked who else was it. He began to examine his face carefully and asked what was wrong with his face. Well, they look like shit. Then a system window appeared in front of him. He was surprised and said that what? His status was written there. His race is Goblin, level 1. He doesn't have any skills. This news shocked him even more, and he asked what's what. The guy already felt, to put it mildly, not very well, but this news finally finished him off. He looked lost and thought that he was Iskano or what. Apparently something really strange happened here. The Border of Fantasies. This is the most popular game with a high rating. People loved it for its incredible graphics and intricate plot. This RPG has become too viral and popular because of its high ratings. And he couldn't get past her either, and she completely sucked him in. He played this game all day long, and right now he was remembering the events that happened yesterday. He thought that yesterday he had just finished off one goblin and raised his level, and then he fell asleep and became a goblin, or what? Why the hell is it a goblin out of all the possible options? He began to look at himself in the mirror again, apparently could not believe what was happening. And then he said that although he looked like a human, but his race was goblin. This made him feel quite uncomfortable, and at that moment he received a system alert which said that the program was running, merging a person's memories with a game character. The guy asked what the merge was, but I couldn't figure out what was going on here, and also the system windows appeared with incomprehensible information. But after that, he understood everything without further words, because he felt it all for himself. All his memories flooded his mind and it gave him a severe headache. From the pain and dizziness, he could not stand on his feet, so he fell again. Taking up a sore head, he thought that this was it. The guy whose body he adopted was not living the sweetest life. Now the memories from his goblin life lined up, and he understood everything. Then his sister burst into the room and said that it was time to get up. It's already morning outside. They have a lot to do, so he should get up soon. The guy apologized to his sister and told her to give him a couple of minutes. His sister understood him, so she didn't object. After that, the sister left the room and left him alone. After some time, he finally recovered and pulled himself together. He packed up and went out to his sister, so he and his sister went to the city. The girl was happy and contented, galloping ahead and humming something to herself. She was holding a basket in her hands. Her older brother was walking behind. Then his sister said that today she would cook her brother the most delicious lunch. The guy asked, is it really true? Well, then he can't wait for it. And he himself looked around carefully and thought that this was the road, these landscapes. Everything was so familiar to him. Without a doubt, he got into the world of the game, the border of fantasy. The setting and the surrounding atmosphere coincide with the world of the game. And based on the memories of this body, he and his sister lost their parents and now live together, or rather, under the patronage of a merchant from the black market, who also uses them as hired labor. Then his sister was completely dreaming and did not notice the stones under her feet. She stumbled and almost fell, but her brother arrived in time and picked her up. He told her to be careful. He was very scared for his sister. The girl looked at her older brother and smiled at him. She thanked him for his help and said she was fine. The guy told his sister, whose name is Lily, that her brother would always look out for her. Apparently, he was really worried about her. Lily smiled at him again and said that since she was blind, she could only rely on him. These words made the guy very sad, and he thought that he would protect. Even though he said so, however, he is a goblin, the weakest race of all possible. He was sent here. But why? What should he do now? Meanwhile, in the mansion of a merchant from the black market, the guy and Lily finally reached their house. The brother accompanied his sister to the door because he was worried that something might happen to her and said that they would see each other later. The girl was already standing at the door and waved to him and said yes. The guy thought that basically he was doing all the errands since his sister was blind. However, she still does some housework. The merchant told him to get him black ore, and the guy accepted this order and said that it was good. So now he's headed for that black ore. He has already come to his workplace. He always worked in silence and was not distracted by anything. When he completely filled the cart with black ore, he went to take it away. But then a group of guys approached him, one of whom unceremoniously and brazenly shoved his car. The guy couldn't stay on his feet and fell, of course, and the black ore also spilled out all over. The boy who shoved him called him green. He told him to move. Apparently they were higher in the hierarchy, so they allowed themselves to treat him like that. After which he added that even with such a simple job, the goblin is not able to cope. Two guys stood behind this boy and grinned nastily, thereby supporting their friend. The goblin had no choice but to obey him. After all, he himself understood perfectly well that he could not do anything to them. So he hurried to get to his feet and picked up his wheelbarrow, which also turned over, and then he hurried to collect all the black ore back. And while the goblin was busy with his work, those guys did not hurry to leave, but continued to mock the goblin. Apparently, in order to once again point out to the goblin his position. The boy who pushed the goblin was called Butch. They began to discuss something loudly, apparently specifically so that the goblin could hear everything. One of Butch's friends asked if it was true that he was able to enter the Magic Academy. His other friend looked at Butch with admiration and said that wow, after all, only representatives from elite society are taken there. Butch was very pleased that he was being praised so much and said that yes, it was not easy to get there. Then Butch turned back to the goblin, who was still collecting black ore, and asked what was it. Isn't he done yet? They were about to leave, and Butch said it was a pity, because at this rate he wouldn't even have time to eat. Apparently, they all really enjoyed mocking those who are weaker than them. It was very unpleasant for the guy to hear all this, but he couldn't do anything, so he just endured it all in silence. He thought that still, being a goblin was just a complete suck. Right now, it was written in his status that his intelligence is 2, magical abilities are 1, and physical strength is 0. He doesn't have any special skills, so he was considered very weak. After that, when he finished his work, apparently he had a break. He sat down on the side nearby and exhaled, said that according to the map, 125 years had passed from the mansion, since the main events in the game. His age corresponds to his human age. However, why goblin? But what happened next surprised him a lot. Right in front of him, a knight descended from the sky, and not alone. The guy immediately jumped to his feet and asked what the hell it was. How did they end up here? But then he remembered something and thought that for sure, there was a special squad of people in the game. This unit was called the Holy Knights, and while he was remembering all this and thinking, the residents of this city had already raised a panic. They started shouting that they were attacked. The guards will protect them, so they have to escape. The guy thought about it and thought that they are now in the hinterland of the continent. Has the dominance of humans increased so much in all this time? This is very different from the plot twists in the game. After that, this squad of knights began to ruthlessly and indiscriminately kill all the inhabitants of this city. Apparently, their commander-in-chief also came down. He laughed. Apparently, it all amused him very much. He said that's what happens when they challenge people. Most likely, it was someone's order, and perhaps the monsters had already tried to act against people and the latter did not like it very much, so they decided to teach them a lesson this way. It was the old man who walked around and called them monsters. The guy immediately rushed to the leak and said that he needed to run as soon as possible. Apparently, he immediately rushed to the aid of his sister, who was now at home. He reached the house in the blink of an eye and rushed inside to pick up his sister. The guy didn't immediately find his sister, so he started calling her. But after some time, he found her in the room, huddled in a corner from fear. She was shaking all over with fear, and did not dare to move, even when her brother called her. He approached her and told her that they needed to go as soon as possible. But then Butch and his friends pushed them away and told them to get out of the way. He still continued to behave very arrogantly, even though they were in the same boat now. Butch was very scared himself, but he wasn't even going to help the goblins. Already running out of the house, he told the goblins that they should not get in their way, and called them a pathetic brat. The guy did not focus on this, because he would not achieve anything anyway. He only defended his sister and asked her how she was. Lily said she was fine. But then the same old man burst into them and said that, and here he is. He looked very arrogant and vile. Lily and her brother managed to run away and even tried to hide, but this man immediately noticed them and said that the two freaks did not have time to escape. Did they? What a pity. He kept mocking them because it brought him pleasure. The guy came forward so as to block his sister with him. He knew perfectly well that he would not be able to defeat him. However, he could not abandon his sister. And yet, he shouted to his sister to run right now. And at the moment when the goblin was distracted, this old man hit him with his sword. Apparently, he understood that they could escape, and he could not allow this. The goblin was badly injured. He flew off to the side and thought that after he was reborn, it's so ridiculous to die. After which he lost consciousness. He opened his eyes, but he no longer saw the familiar house and thought that he had really died. Even though he was reborn, he couldn't do anything. He couldn't protect himself or his sister, and yet his family, Lily, would die. He knew he might be dead by now, but he still couldn't stop worrying about his sister. But then he heard a voice. Someone suggested to him that he could lend him his power. After that, he received a notification that all kinds of magic had been studied. After that, the goblin came to his senses and could already understand what was happening. He looked around and realized that he was in some strange space. He again began to study the system window that appeared in front of him. He said it was his status, and his level has increased so much. Then a voice told him to listen carefully. He won't be able to use all his powers at once. However, gradually he will be able to master them. After the transfer of forces, he will die. So that, the guy shouted for him to stop, and he wanted to say something else, but a voice interrupted him and said that they didn't have time to chat. Time is running out, he has to finish them all. And at that moment, the guy woke up and heard this vile old man tell his sister that she would go after him. And he had already swung his sword in order to kill her. But then a guy got up and told him to stop. The old man turned around and asked what. He did not expect this in any way, because he was sure that this goblin was already dead. He looked at this goblin with surprise and asked if he was still alive. The knights immediately connected and already moved towards him in order to kill him. Apparently, they understood their boss without words. So this old man said that, however, it wouldn't last. But the guys weren't scared at all. He thought he should kill them all. Then he used dark magic called demonic leap. In the blink of an eye, he dealt with all the knights so that their commander-in-chief did not even have time to understand what had happened. The old man froze in surprise, not knowing what had just happened. He asked what was what. This goblin picked up a sword that was lying nearby, one of the knights, and approached this vile old man. He moved behind him with great speed and asked him that he dared to raise a sword against his sister, didn't he? The old man was confused and started calling him names again. He asked what? Yes, who is he anyway? The guy killed this old man and said he was just a goblin. The old man dropped dead and didn't even realize what had happened. His sister Lily, who had been sitting in the corner all this time and was trembling with fear, looked questioningly in the direction of the sound. After they exterminated all these knights, but during this whole battle their city was significantly battered. Some buildings were completely destroyed, some only by half. All the residents of this city gathered in the main square. The merchant went to the main street and said that according to the statement of the guards, the invaders had already left the city. Someone from the residents of this city asked if they really coped. Apparently, after the horror he had experienced, he simply could not believe it. He added that it just can't be. Another guy said that someone saw a demon in a cloak who dealt with people. Apparently they meant the goblin, but they didn't know it was him. The girl said that what happiness. Thanks to him, they are now safe. Meanwhile, this guy and his sister were sitting nearby against the wall and did not interfere in their conversations. The system window reappeared in front of him, on which reincarnation was written. Awakening of level 1, the task was completed. So now the study of dark magic has begun to be replenished. The guy was surprised and asked what was going on. The task? He didn't understand what it all meant. But then he felt very strong pain again. He jumped up and grabbed his head. Lily felt that something was wrong with her brother and asked, "What is it? Is it really hurting him?" The girl looked very worried, but the guy hurried to calm down his sister and said that no, he was fine. And he himself thought that this was how he would eventually receive his new powers. Now, it seems, he began to slowly understand all this. Then his son ran up to this merchant. His son turned out to be the guy who bullied Goblin, Butch. He called out to his father and friends and said thank the gods that they were all right. He didn't want to say it, of course, but he was the one who killed the demons in the cloak. Apparently, Butch wanted to take all the glory for himself, although in fact, he was even more scared than the goblin and could hardly have done anything. His father was very happy about all this and asked what. Did he handle all of them? Butch confidently said that of course. It's not for nothing that he trained his magic and entered the magic academy. He spoke especially loudly so that all the inhabitants would hear him and begin to praise him. The residents of the city were very happy and asked if it was really true. They surrounded him and began to tell him that he was simply incredible. They thanked him and said that, thanks to him, they were all saved now. Butch just waved it off and said it wasn't worth the thanks. It's his duty to protect the residents of the city. If they want to see what kind of magic he defeated them, then let them look into his mansion. People were immediately interested. Butch added that, however, this spectacle is certainly not free. The goblin who heard all this thought that this was it. He's looking for easy money and fame, isn't he? But everyone fell for this lie. They were not even embarrassed that Butch demanded money for it and they were ready to pay him. Residents of the city began to say that they really want to see this magic with their own eyes. They asked how much does it cost. They will pay any amount. Then someone called out to him and said that he had no money. Maybe then he will give him something. Then Butch turned around and saw goblins with his sister. Butch couldn't help but be sarcastic and make a mockery of them. So he looked at them carefully and, grinning, asked that the goblins still survived, didn't they? How stubborn are they after all? They have a great will to live, don't they? The guy couldn't stand it anymore. He couldn't leave everything as it is. Not because he wanted fame or recognition. He didn't need it at all, but because he was sorry that the residents of this city were being fooled. And they fool around so much that they don't even notice it, or maybe they just don't want to notice it, so they're blown away by all this lies. The goblin got up and asked him what was wrong, because he had defeated people. Then why is he lying? Butch was furious, because he could not allow his deception to be revealed, and asked what was he talking about. Why would he lie? The goblin said that since he wasn't lying, then let him defeat him. If he wins, he will have to confess everything. Butch's friend asked if he was crazy or something. Apparently, he wanted to continue to stay near Butch, since he was the son of an influential man, which is why he stood up for him. But Butch stopped him and grinned and said that if he won, what would he do? And he released his magic into him without even waiting for an answer. Butch shouted to everyone to watch this goblin burn in a dark flame. He was sure that the goblin had been defeated, and he told the residents of his city that that's exactly how he defeated these people, with his incredible dark magic. But then something went clearly not according to his plan. Everything around him was shrouded in dark magic, but it did not belong to him. He was very surprised and asked what. But then he heard a strange voice that asked him that he really defeated a whole squad of people alone. Right. Butch was shaking all over with fear, but he said that of course. The voice told him not to dare to lie to him. Butch kept insisting on his own, although he was really very afraid, but he could not allow the whole truth to come out, so he continued to lie and said that he was not lying. To which the voice told him that he was lying, and for lying, he would pay with his life. This strange voice put a lot of pressure on him so that Butch finally confessed to the deception. And then everything worked out. Butch, apparently, was very scared of this and said that okay, he lied. After that, he stopped, but he realized that nothing could be hidden anymore, so he added that he hid in a warehouse and did not fight with anyone. The voice asked him what was it like when all the residents of the city found out the truth, only after that the goblin cancelled his magic. Butch, horrified, began to look at everything in the neighborhood. Apparently, he really wanted to believe that he had imagined it all. The goblin thought it was a dark magic called illusion. This spell casts a hallucination on the opponent if he met the gaze of the caster. Goblin didn't say anything more to Butch and didn't even pay any attention to him. He just walked up to his sister and said they had to go. Butch's friends told him to stop, but the goblin was no longer going to obey their orders, so he continued on his way. They asked what it was just now. Did he really cope with that squad of people? The goblin was very angry at them, and only then did he turn to them, but only to look at them. And then he asked, what really? He took his sister by the hand and led her home, asking, what is interesting? Who is the hero who defended their city? He was reborn into the weakest goblin, but before his death he was able to become the strongest. And with this power, he will be able to protect him and his sister. After all these proceedings, the brother brought his sister to their house. They sat down on the steps and just sat there in silence. Their house was completely destroyed and is no longer habitable. Lily looked at her brother and said that he was behaving so strangely apparently. She was still very excited and scared because of what had recently happened. She asked her brother that he must be tired of all these events, right? The brother did not answer his sister's question, only asked Lily to turn her head. The sister asked what? Then she turned her head to her brother. The brother touched his sister's cheek and applied dark magic called healing. The guy thought that his sister was blind from birth. However, if he uses high-level magic on her, then Lily opened her eyes and, surprised, asked what? How is she? Does he see? Now Lily could see everything around her. She said she could see. The guy said that a lot of things had changed during the attack of people. Now he knows how to use dark magic. Lily was still very surprised by this and said that a lot. She asked that yes, how is this even possible? Lily was very happy to get her sight and see her brother, but now she was confused. The guy thought about it and asked that maybe he had been talented all his life. However, his abilities could only manifest themselves in a critical situation. Lily asked, is that all? But they're goblins. Apparently, all this was really surprising for her, because she was used to being constantly bullied because they were goblins. And they also have no power because they are the weakest monsters. The guy smiled at her and, patting his sister on the head, said that whatever it was, he was very glad that she could see him now. Lily agreed with him and said that it was true. She cried with happiness and said that her brother was able to heal her. He's just incredible. The guy hugged his sister and began to calm her down. After that, the system window appeared in front of him again, in which it was said that reincarnation, awakening of level 2, the quest was completed. New dark magic spells are being studied. A new file has been added. Having digested all this information, the guy was very surprised and thought that Lily didn't understand what was going on and looked at her brother questioningly. The guy himself was confused and thought, what's going on? But then a girl came out of the system window, very small in size, like a fairy, only with green skin. She showed up and said that this was her new job. Well, if she wanted it that way, then there's nothing to be done. She appeared in front of her brother and sister and said she was a goblin fairy. Lily and her brother have a questioning look at this little fairy. It was the first time they had seen something like this, so they were a little surprised. The fairy said she was assigned a mission. She must guide them to the hidden goblin village, and she is very happy to meet him, and called him the invincible goblin. The guy tensed up and said that a hidden goblin village, isn't it? Meanwhile, on the magical continent, an uninhabited area, the goblin fairy led the brother and sister there. Apparently the way was not close, but they did not take anything with them and did not say goodbye to anyone, because they had no one there, so they had nothing to lose. But it was still a little scary. The guy looked incredulously at the fairy that was flying right in front of him, pointing the way, and thought it was a goblin fairy, wasn't it? The Border of Fantasy is a game with an open and vast world. It's all because of the advanced game system. It was possible to meet many unusual races, and yet, here this fairy apparently felt the gaze of this guy on her and turned around, asking that something was really wrong. The guy was a little embarrassed, because it's not very decent to stare at someone like that, and said that no, everything is fine. Then the fairy stopped and said that they had arrived. They have arrived in a magical continent, a hidden goblin village. The guy began to look around carefully and said that he did not know that the goblins had their own village for her. And I thought that, although it was never mentioned in the game either, so it's not surprising that he didn't know about it. And besides, this village was hidden, so not everyone could get there. The fairy landed on Lily's head and looked at her brother. Lily raised her eyes and began to look at this fairy with curiosity. The fairy explained to this goblin that a concealment spell had been cast on this village, so it's no wonder he didn't know about it. The guy said that's it. Then the fairy flew up again and said that here, she takes him to old age. So the brother and sister followed the fairy again. Along the way, they met goblins, who were looking at them attentively and whispering about something. Apparently, guests don't come here very often, so their behavior was quite normal. The guy noticed it and thought, what is it with them? Then his sister Lily was surrounded by goblins. They were very curious to see another child and, apparently, they wanted to play with her. They said she was so beautiful, and they asked me to play with them. One of them took her by the hand and said that she should go with them. Lily wasn't expecting this, so she looked at her brother. She said that well, and then she fell silent. Apparently, she herself was at a loss, because it was the first time she was offered to play. The fairy anticipated the goblin's question and said that she didn't have to attend the meeting, so the brother told his sister that if she wanted, she could play with them. Hearing this, the sister was very happy and said that it was good. And the guy himself thought that she had only recently regained her sight, so she must really want to have fun. So let her get some rest. After some time, the fairy finally brought him to the old age of the village. The headman came out and met the unexpected guests. They went into his house and sat down by the fireplace. The headman sighed heavily and said that he did not know that there were still goblins outside the village. Their prophet was right. One day, a young man was supposed to come to their village with a goblin fairy. According to legend, he is obliged to give the young man their hidden treasure. The guy looked closely at this old man and thought, what is a prophet? He didn't understand what it was about. And I thought, so that's whose voice he heard at his death. Then the headman got up and told him to wait a second. He's going to bring it to him now. After that, the elder left. While the headman was away, the fairy said that the inhabitants of this village are very kind and open to guests. But living far from civilization, they are doomed to be left without vital resources. She asked him if he understood what she was driving at. The fate of goblins is not to be envied. All monsters despise them, and for people, they are like bugs that are not able to fight them back. People call it natural selection. However, this is complete nonsense, because they just mow down their kind day by day. The guy clenched his fist in anger and said that's how it was. This is true, because in the game goblins were the weakest opponent for the player. However, he would never have thought that he would be in their shoes. After all this time he was killing them indiscriminately. Just then the elder came, and just as the fairy had finished her story, he approached the goblin and, handing him something, said that this was for him. It was a scroll that the guy immediately unfolded. But what he saw there shocked him very much. He said that it was the same after which they both looked up at the elder. The elder did not sit down. He stood with his back to them and said that the life of their race was too fragile. Because of the exile, he hesitated. It was obvious that words were coming with difficulty. It was hard for him to talk about it. But still he pulled himself together and said that because of the exile, their existence would come to an end very soon. But if they had a strong leader, they could survive. It was clear that he was alluding to this goblin who had come here thanks to the fairies. The guy got up and called out to the headman. After that, he looked out the window where he saw the little goblins, who were very curious and also looked at them. One of these kids said that he noticed them, after which the three of them ran away. And then, when they got up the courage, they went to the headman's house. They looked at each other and counted something. Then they asked him to save their village. The children were very young, but they already understood a lot, even more than adults. Then the other goblins of this village came. They all recognized this goblin, and in one voice said that he was the young man from the prophecy. They also fell on their knees before him and begged him to save them. It was embarrassing for the goblin to see that someone had fallen on his knees in front of him in order to ask for something. After some time, when they had discussed everything, the guy, along with his sister and the fairies, went out into the forest. He started thinking again and thought that, based on the game description, goblins are the weakest race on the continent, and alone they are very weak. However, they can create problems in a group. Some of the goblins have special powers, and this race also has a high reproductive ability. And yet, the goblin is in danger of disappearing completely, isn't it? The human race began to actively conquer the continent. But why did this happen? Then the fairy turned to him and asked what he intended to do now. The guy said that first he would like to make sure what abilities he managed to unlock. So he did not waste time in vain and immediately opened the system window in order to see everything for himself. He said that and whether he would be able to help the village with his skills. Apparently, he seriously decided to take up this case because he is a goblin himself, so he must help them. He began to study all this carefully and thought that although he replenishes his skills with completing tasks, they are pumped at fairly low levels. They are even displayed in a strange order. Now he had such skills as Shadow Guardian, Dark Impulse, Shadow Camouflage, Shadow Threads, Dark Magic, Healing, Evil Eye, Dark Illusion, Dark Veil, Hellfire, Poisonous Mist, Deadly Capture, Elemental Coating, Goblin. The guy thought that probably the skill tree was missing from the program. However, apart from a bunch of skills, his status has also increased. Now his intelligence is 408,600. His strength was 634,500. His magical abilities and physical strength also rose. He sighed and said that well, and decided that first he wanted to test his strength. After that, with all the dope, he hit a stone wall that was nearby. He used his dark magic, Hellfire. His sister and the fairy froze in place and watched all this with curiosity. After the guy experienced it all, he said it was not bad. His skills really impressed him. But the strength was really very impressive, so the fairy could not resist. But Lily helped her, and now the fairy was lying on her palms. He looked at the piece of paper on which the amplifying magic was written, which included Shadow Guardian, Dark Pulse, Shadow Camouflage, and Shadow Threads. There was also healing magic, which included Dark Magic, Healing, and Goblin Kinship. There was the magic of a nonverbal attack, the Evil Eye, and the Dark Illusion. There was a protective magic that included a Shadow Veil, attacking magic, Hellfire, Poison Mist, and Death Grip, and the last magic of enchantment of objects, Elementary Coating. The guy sighed contentedly and thought that now that everything is in order, it will be much easier to use spells. He said that, and now he needs to finish one unfinished business. He looked at the scroll and thought that in the scroll that the headman gave him, there was a map with the designation of a specific place in the hidden village. So, without wasting any time, the three of them went straight there. When they got there, they saw a small clearing, and in the center of this clearing there was a huge stone on which something was written. It was a magical continent, a hidden goblin village, an ancestral cemetery. The fairy flew closer to this big stone and said that it was a memorial, and it was built in memory of the goblin hero. The guy said that at this point he should pronounce a very important spell, and this spell is called Dark Magic, Goblin Kinship. Apparently, he was there to summon his ancestors, so the goblin immediately got down to business. After he cast this spell, goblins appeared around them. Among them were Hobgoblin, Dragon Goblin, Goblin Priestess, and Goblin General. The fairy said they had come at last. Apparently, she also knew what the scroll was about. The guy said that once in 1,000 years, even goblins have individuals with incredible abilities, and these so-called mutants are among ordinary goblins, heroic souls that have come to life. thanks to him, and they will do whatever he says. The goblin general knelt before him and said he was the savior. They will heed his words. The guy told them that he wanted to defeat an army of demons and an army of people. In order to bring peace to these lands, he will be the one who will bring peace to the goblin family. After all these events, the guy fell asleep again and found himself in a strange place. It was similar to the space he was in last time. Maybe it was the same place. Then someone called out to him and called him the chosen one. The goblin immediately roused himself and began to listen carefully. He was told to wake up, but the guy resisted and did not want to wake up. He said to let him sleep. He really had a hard day, so he was very tired and wanted to sleep. And that voice couldn't stand it and shouted for him to get up now. The guy's eyes snapped open. Apparently, he was scared, or perhaps it was very abrupt. He saw a girl in front of him. She had long white hair and also had horns. He looked at her questioningly and asked who she was. The girl said she was a goddess, the goblin goddess. The guy looked at her in bewilderment and asked, "What is the goblin goddess?" Apparently, this was the first time he had heard of her. He began to remember something and thought that, but surely in the house of old age he had seen a fresco depicting a woman with 2 horns. Who would have thought that even goblins have their own deity? He squinted at this goddess again and thought that, although at first glance you can't tell, she looks more like a seductive succubus than a goddess. The goblin goddess, as if reading his thoughts, said that he had just thought of something obscene to his little skull, hadn't she? The guy shuddered and blushed all over. He said no, that she was. The goblin goddess sighed and said that okay, let's go. Then she said that on the day they met, she had little time to properly clarify the whole situation. She will tell him why she decided to reward him with a part of the divine power. As the game progressed, one could not count how many goblins died a miserable death, because they are the weakest race of all on the continent. This race was exiled because of its impotence. However, even they can become the strongest. The guy asked which of the weakest to become the strongest. How's that? He really didn't understand what she meant by that. The goblin goddess said that the legacy of the ancestors. He had taken all the power from her fallen brethren. Dozens of the weakest joined together and became the strongest. Apparently, it was about him. The goblin goddess said that such is the power of goblins. They all want to protect what is very dear to them. And also his younger sister is very dear to them. The guy immediately remembered Lily. The goddess of goblins said that in the future their race is waiting for an imminent demise. But this can still be changed and only he is able to do it. But then this guy woke up abruptly, so the dialogue with the goblin goddess was abruptly interrupted. He was lying in his room in his bed and it was already morning. He came to his senses a little and sat up on his bed and asked, "What is he alone?" He clenched his hand into a fist and said that he understood her. He will create a new and safe world for them. Now the goblin was determined to change the fate of the entire goblin race, after which he finally decided to pack up. He sat down at the table and began to write something. After a while, he finished everything and said that it was ready. It was an application for admission to the Magic Academy, an exam in dark magic. The fairy was sitting on the windowsill and asked if he was sure it was a good idea. The guy got up and sealed the envelope and said that yes, she shouldn't worry about it. He went to the window and said that he wanted to create a world where all the villagers and his sister would live in harmony and prosperity. And to do this, he needs to defeat one of the kings of the demon army. What rules this territory, namely King Deer. At the moment, this king resides on the territory of the Magic Academy, which he founded himself. If he becomes an outstanding student of the academy, then he will be able to meet the founder in person. And at that moment he will kill him. The guy already even imagined how it would all be. After that, he packed up all his things and went outside, because he was already going to hit the road. His younger sister came out to see him off. The brother patted his sister on the head and said that she would have to stay here. He had to leave her in a hidden village in order not to expose her to a blow. He put on his hood and told his sister not to worry, because he would return to her very soon. Lily looked very worried and, raising her eyes to him, told him to be very careful. Then he said goodbye to his sister. Now he has already turned to the fairy and said that he is heading to the academy to take the entrance exam. And I asked her what she would do. The fairy said that, of course, she would have something to do in the village, but it would be much more interesting to look after him. So she decided to go with him. After some time, they finally reached their destination. It was also a magical continent, and King Deer's territory is a nearby city. After spending the night in a small house in the morning, the guy left the house and said that it seemed that the academy was in that direction. Then he heard some screams. Some man shouted at the girl and asked if she would really do it normally, not capable. The girl was sitting on her knees in front of him and, lowering her head, looking at the floor, asked him for forgiveness. It was a fat man who kicked her and said that was enough. Because of her, he's already late for the deal. The girl covered her face with her hands and fell to the ground. People who crowded nearby said that he was back to his old ways. He always gets so angry when his slaves don't behave perfectly. Not an enviable life for goblin slaves. The fairy said that this scumbag himself is a low-ranked demon, but he is proud of the weaker ones. He just wants to hit it right. The guy looked closely at this fat man and thought that he seemed to know him. It's the slaver Brandley. There was a character named Brandley in the game, a lowly demon noble who made his fortune in the slave trade. There are a lot of terrible crimes, blackmail and contract violations behind his back. Simply put, he has a terrible reputation. To meet such a cartoon villain here in the city. What a stroke of luck that is. Now is the time to check how the summoning of the heroic spirit works. He turned to the fairy and told her to take care of that girl. The fairy sighed and said that yes, he didn't have to talk. After all, she already understood everything perfectly. The guy went into some alley and said that dark magic, goblin kinship. He began to recite a spell, saying that following the light out of this impenetrable darkness, come to his call and fulfill his order. He summoned the goblin priestess. The priestess of Goblin B appeared in front of him, who stretched out and said that it had been so long since she had visited this world. She turned to the guy and, calling him a master, asked what and so why did he call her? How can she help him? The fairy is dissatisfied, looked at the goblin priestess and said that she was behaving too frivolously for a heroic spirit. The guy turned to the goblin priestess and asked her forgiveness for what he did so immediately. However, he wants to ask her about a favor. Then he told her everything. Meanwhile, this fat slave trader kept bullying this little girl. He pulled her by the chain he had tied around her neck and told her very rudely to get up right away. Although she got to him cheaper, but what kind of a girl she is after all. The girl was already barely able to stand on her feet, and because this vile man pulled her by the chain, she fell to the ground. The slaver said what a useless trash she was. After seeing this picture, people started whispering again. Having squeezed through all this crowd, the guy approached this man and told him to listen to him. The man looked at him appraisingly and asked what he was, who else was he? The guy asked that he didn't need this girl, did he? So let him give it to him. The man didn't like it very much, and he asked what's what. Why would he give it to him? She's his slave, and he bought her. The guy asked what, so he doesn't want to get rid of her. The man, waving off, said that of course not. The guy grinned and said that then let him buy it. He will buy this slave by paying 100 times the price of her original price. The slaver was surprised and asked what was what. The guy repeated and said that he would buy this slave and pay him 100 times more than her original price. The man looked at him incredulously and asked, what's what? Then he started shouting at him that this girl was worth a maximum of 30 gold, and he wants to pay 30 times more for her, or what? Apparently, the men really didn't understand him. The guy calmly told him that yes, here's the money. The goblin priestess was standing behind him with bags of money. The guy asked the man what or would that not be enough. The goblin priestess said that she was carrying an oud. After that, they pelted this slaver with bags of gold. The man was very surprised and asked, what, really? He immediately opened all the bags in order to check whether he had been deceived, and found that there were real gold coins and said that all 300 gold coins were there. He looked at this guy in surprise and asked if he was sure. The guy confidently said that yes, of course, they're all his. Then he asked what they had agreed, right. The man immediately began to rake all these bags closer to himself and told the guy to take it into account, because this product is non-refundable. Then he loaded all these bags of gold into his cart and left. The girl looked at her savior in surprise and asked why. The guy bent down to her and, showing his face, said that he was also a goblin like her. That's why he saved her. She has nothing to worry about. The girl asked him what, but where did that uncle go? The guy told her not to think about it, because now everything will be fine, and no one will offend her anymore. The girl looked at him questioningly and asked what would not happen. The man hid the amount he received in his black safe, which he keeps in his cart. The guy knew about it from the time of the game. The goblin priestess has special skills such as stealth and ghostliness. Thanks to her ability called stealthy, she approached this slaver's wagon unnoticed, and her ghostly ability allowed her to pass through the wall of his wagon. All that's left to do is to take your own money out of this slaver's safe, which is what the goblin priestess did. This money belonged to him anyway, and deceiving such bad people is not so bad. They cannot allow the slave trade to flourish in their new world. The priestess grinned and said that the master was such a flatterer. He said only she could handle it. Apparently, she really was. It's very nice. The guy held out his hand to this girl and asked if she could get up. The girl was surprised at him, looked at him, then took his hand and thanked him. The guy turned to the fairy and told her to take this little girl to the village. The fairy said yes as if she had already read all his thoughts, and she already knew what she would have to do. The guy said that, and he will go to the entrance exam. He looked at the place where he would have to take the exam and said that from now on a new story would be written. Magic Continent. King Dur's territory is the main gate of the Magic Academy. The guy finally arrived at his destination. He opened the gate and went inside. He thought that only children of aristocrats could enter this elite school. However, anyone can also take part in the exam, and if he has the ability, he will be unconditionally accepted for training. The guy has already gone inside the building and got ready to take his exam. He demonstrated all his skills. He went to the waiting room for the judges to make a decision. But despite his race, they just couldn't ignore his abilities. If he becomes the best student in the academy, then he will be able to meet with its director, King Durya, and then he will overthrow one of the 7 kings of the demon army with his own hands. Having passed the necessary exams, the guy was enrolled in this academy, and the next day he came to the entrance ceremony. He entered the territory of this academy, and then a man called out to all the students. These men were told that the students who go to the entrance ceremony should line up in a row. That's what all the students did. The line turned out to be very long, and the guy stood at the very end and sighed wearily. But then the one who stood behind him touched his shoulder. The guy turned around and saw a girl behind him, who were concerned about him, looked at him. There was a feeling that something had happened to her. The girl told him to listen to her. Apparently, she was very worried, so she blurted out everything very quickly and asked if he had any food with him. For example, something sweet. The guy looked into his pockets and asked, "What's sweet?" Then he began to carefully look through his pockets. But then, apparently, he found something. It was a small pink bag that his sister had given him with her. There was a note hanging on this bag, which said that she had made him chocolate for good luck, so he has to do his best. This even made the guy's hands shake. He said it's the same. But then this girl brazenly snatched this bag of chocolate and said it would do. Then she thanked him. The guy didn't even have time to react in time, and the girl had already eaten all the chocolate that his sister had prepared for him. Seeing this, the guy screamed loudly out of desperation. The girl has already managed quite a chocolate and said that thank him very much for it. The guy was just desperate. This blonde girl said that as soon as her nerves are naughty, her magic gets out of control, but food helps her well with this. For example, like chocolate. I let her go straight away, so thank you very much. But the girl did not have time to finish as she saw the condition of her savior and froze in fear. The guy looked at her with hatred and said that Lily made him this chocolate. The girl laughed nervously and said that it looked like she had done something she shouldn't have done. After she realized that she had done too much, she said. Then to him that she asks him for forgiveness. She did not know that this chocolate was made for her by a close person. Apparently, the girl was really sorry. But for the guy it was a very strong blow, so he still looked at her with hatred. He was really very dear to the chocolate that his younger sister made him. After that, he couldn't stand it and told her everything that boiled over. He said that this chocolate was made by his younger sister, whom he has been taking care of since childhood. Since she was very weak from birth, all she could do was take care of the house and the household, and she found no other way to support him. That's why she decided to make chocolate, putting all her love, feeling into it, and the girl thought that it looked like she really opened the gates to hell. The girl thanked him again and said that no, she would definitely return this debt to him. She introduced herself and said her name was Lety and asked what about his how. The guy said that he had. He lowered his eyes and sighed sadly, saying that he had no name. He thought that for some reason, he had absolutely no memories of his name even after reincarnation. The girl also sighed and said that's how it is. The guy did not pay attention to her at all and thought that, however, it was not surprising. After all, he lived all his life as a slave of the lower class. They don't give names to people like him. But then the girl said that then she herself comes up with a name for him. The guy was very surprised by this and asked what. But the girl did not seem to notice this question and had already begun to come up with a name for him. She thought about it very much and asked what about the name Lime. She looked at him and said that he had bright green eyes, similar to the color of lime. It made him smile, and he told her what kind of nonsense she was talking. Lety said come on to him. It's just a great name and how it suits him. After which she asked him that they would be acquainted. And she called him by his new and first name, apparently. Lime said yes. At that moment, it was announced to all students that all students who had passed the entrance tests should gather in the central square of the academy. Lety immediately got ready and told Lime that they needed to go soon. But apparently Lime has already made enemies. 2 guys are very unhappy with him. They looked at him, one of whom said that this kid It was some kind of, apparently, a very respected student. He told his buddy that, yes, it was that shit goblin slave. He asked, and what did he forget here at all? Meanwhile, in the central square of the Magic Academy, after this announcement, all the new students went to the central square of this academy. There were 3 teachers who began to evaluate new students. The students split into 3 tracks. One of the examiners, having already evaluated the previous student, said that the next one. 3 students came forward and began to demonstrate their magic power. By recording all the results, the examiners invited the next trio. One of the guys apparently failed and was very angry with himself. 2, the guy did a great job and was pleased with himself. After that, the examiner invited the next student. It was Lety. She was collected, came forward and was already ready to demonstrate her magical power. She showed a very good result. The guys also paid attention to her, and one of them said that the rumors really weren't lying. The Dark Elf Princess herself arrived at the academy to enroll. Lime also looked at her in surprise and thought that they wanted to say that Lety is a princess of the Dark Elves or something. It just can't be before that. She doesn't look like a princess at all. Lety smiled all over. Apparently she was very pleased with herself and the praise that the audience showered on her. Lime began to doubt and thought that maybe then he should talk to her more formally. Now he felt a little uncomfortable after all this. Lety came up to him all pleased with herself and asked Lime if he had seen it. Lime cleared his throat and said it was just amazing. If she continues like this, she will be able to pass the exam easily, won't she? Lety was very pleased with his words, and she asked if he really thought that. She thanked him for his praise and said that she would continue to try. But then the guy decided to spoil all the fun. He, as always, got in at the wrong time. He went up to Lime and asked who they had here. A nobody who will never pass the exam praises the princess of the Dark Elves, isn't it? What a squalor he is. It was the vampire Haig. Lety immediately stopped being happy. He looked at this vampire questioningly. Lime also turned around, but his face was expressionless. Apparently, he just didn't care what this vampire was saying to him, because it wasn't the first time he had heard such insulting words in his address. And why should he react to them? Because it will only please this arrogant guy more. Vampire Haig came forward and poked his finger at Lime, said that he remembered him. He was a servant of Butch. He asked him, and what was he doing here? Did he really think he could pass the entrance exam? And he, as they look, is really just an optimist. Vampire Haig and his friends continued to mock Lime for a long time. But Lime didn't pay any attention to him at all. He just sighed wearily and turned away from him. However, Lety could not tolerate such an outburst. She stood up for her new friend, whom she even gave a name to. She folded her arms on her chest and shouted that, well, he came here to take the exam and so what? Lime looked at his new girlfriend and thought that he could stand up for himself. Lety could no longer restrain her beginnings to criticize this vampire in full. She said that she was 100% sure that Lime was much stronger than a rude guy like him. Lime thought, how does she know that? She had never even seen him in battle. But Lime clearly didn't want to get involved in this skirmish. Vampire Haig apparently also lost all interest and was about to leave. He just looked at Lety and said that, yes, she was going out of her way to protect this simpleton. Lety was seething with anger. Then she turned to Lime and said that he should show them his strongest spell. Lime, who didn't even want to stand out from everyone else, sighed and thought that why should he prove something to someone here? But he still told Lety that okay, he would try. Lety started getting mad at him and said he should be more serious. She's rooting for him. Lime raised his gaze and, after assessing everyone, thought that if he was more serious, as Lety says, he would just smash this square into a chip. He looked at the target he was supposed to hit with his magic ability and thought that even though he wanted to test his strength to the maximum, however, he thinks that he should restrain himself in order not to arouse suspicion from others. Then the examiner hurried him and said that it was more lively. Lime concentrated and put his left hand forward. He closed his eyes, apparently for better concentration in order to feel his strength better. Then he said go ahead. His strength really was just amazing. It was felt by everyone present here. The shockwave engulfed everyone. After the dust and dirt had all settled, there was nothing left of the target he was aiming at. There was even a huge pit formed there. The examiner was quite shocked. He even dropped his hand. That is, where I recorded all the students' results and asked what it was. Lime, unlike everyone else, was dissatisfied with himself. He clutched his head and thought he had overdone it. But everyone was in complete shock. Even the vampire Haig couldn't stay on his feet and was lying on the grass. Everyone was staring at him open-mouthed. Lety couldn't even stand still. She jumped on together and asked what's what. She jumped up to him and said it was just incredible. He's just cool. Lime thought that even though he overdid it on the practical test, he still passed it. He came up to Lety and said that he had given his all, as she had asked him. Then they had a written test, which they passed inside the building. Further events occur after the written test. After this test, all students took a break. Lety was leaning against the wall, looking very thoughtful. Lime came up to her and asked what was she doing. Lety didn't even look at him. She said that the tests for her were always a continuous torture, and they were just taken out for the entrance. So she is very worried. She asked him if he was even worried. Lime said a little. Although for him, unlike Lety, it was not a big problem. He thought that in this test there were the main sensory components of the game, and since he played it just for days on the fly, he has no doubt that he answered all the questions correctly. Then someone came up to him. Lime looked up and saw the disgruntled face of Vampire Haig. Vampire Haig told him that he did not know what kind of trick he pulled in order to deceive the examiners, but such a nobody as he could not conjure like that. Apparently, he just didn't want to admit his mistake and continued to insist on his own. Lime didn't stay silent this time either and told him that he probably had a lot of free time to think about others, not about himself. He asked him what, is he really so sure that he was able to pass this exam? Vampire Haig apparently did not expect such an outburst from him, and asked what. He reached for his sword and told him that before how he. But he was interrupted by an announcement in which it was said that combat tests would begin very soon, so all students should go to the central square. All the students immediately started up, and the Vampire Haig was unhappy, put his sword back and said that this time they were interrupted. However, he must know his place. After that, all the students gathered in the square. A man with glasses came out to them and said that he would explain to them how the combat tests would take place. Since this year, the fate of his departure has changed a little. If earlier students demonstrated their skills in sparring against each other, now all students will fight against one goal. Apparently, all the students were not very happy about it. They looked at the examiner with displeasure and asked what. What does it all mean? It's all against one, isn't it? Vampire Haig also drooped, but did not say anything against it. Lepta, on the contrary, looked very collected. The examiner explained to them that their director, had introduced a new admission test policy. In his opinion, only the worthy can stand up against one of the strongest opponents. Lety looked very focused, and Lime is the opposite. At that moment, the gate opened. All the students were very nervous. Someone's eyes sparkled in the darkness, after which a huge monster came out and roared loudly. Here Lime was already very surprised and thought that it was a thunder dragon. He appears only at the end of the game and does not live in this region. And he's their opponent, isn't he? But the thunder dragon didn't keep anyone waiting long. He growled loudly again and rushed towards the applicants. Poor applicants were very much afraid of him and rushed to the scattering. Some even stumbled and fell. Apparently, none of them expected this. No one was ready for this. Then the thunder dragon abruptly stopped and began to concentrate. Lime looked very scared and shuddered. After that, the monster released electric fire, and this agony was directed directly at a group of applicants who were running away from this monster. However, they did not manage to escape from this. The blow caught them by surprise. Many of them fell to the ground and lost consciousness. Some could still move, but they would hardly be able to continue taking this exam. Vampire Haig also looked very scared, which was very strange for him. While everyone was running, he froze in place and asked, yes, how should they cope with him? Lety alone was not afraid and stood firmly on her feet. She looked very determined. While everyone was running from this monster, Lety, on the contrary, rushed to him. While not expressing anything, Lime was scared for his new girlfriend and called out to her. However, Lety was not going to back down. She told him that she had to pass this exam at any cost. It's all for her kingdom. After that, she threw herself at this dragon, using her power called wind fetters. The thunder dragon was bound by her chains. After that, without wasting time, Lety immediately used her next ability called wind arrow. Having pulled this arrow, she was about to release it stubbornly at this monster. However, what she saw caught her off guard. This Graham dragon turned out to be much stronger than she had imagined. It was not difficult for him to break her from the chain she had put on him just recently. The thunder dragon stared straight at her, then opened its mouth and growled at her. Lety cringed with fear, but still did not back down. She closed her eyes. I thought, no, she doesn't want to die. But nothing happened here, so she carefully opened her eyes and looked ahead questioningly. But Lime came to her defense. He stood right in front of the girl and, using his magic, created a shield that did not allow the thunder dragon to step further. Lema turned to the girl, who looked very surprised, and asked her how she was. From surprise, the girl did not immediately realize what was happening. But when she came to, she said that she was fine. Lime was very collected and told her to wait a bit. He'll deal with him quickly now. The girl is worried, looked at him and asked what is fast. Lime didn't say anything else to her. Then the thunder dragon recoiled from this barrier and plunged into himself. Black smoke covered it, so nothing was visible. Then a terrible lightning flashed. Now this thunder dragon was fully charged with electricity. It became much more dangerous and easily destroyed the shield that Lime had created in order to protect Lety. And then there was a huge explosion. However, Lime was able to figure it out in time and took the girl in his arms, rose into the sky. Despite the whole situation, Lime remained calm and unwavering. He said it wasn't that easy to break through. He sighed wearily and said that how much trouble with him. Lety looked around and asked if they had taken off or something. Lime told her they had very little time. He apologized to her and said she should wait downstairs. Lety now looked at him questioningly and asked what was down there. She wanted to say something else to him, but she didn't have time, because Lime released her from his arms. The girl began to fall down, but did not immediately realize what was happening. And after the betrothed looked down and screamed in fear. However, the landing was very soft. She was not injured. Lime thought it all out in advance. She landed on a huge soft slime. She jumped up and asked what is this? While Lety was unable to think, Lime was summoning a heroic spirit called Slimegoblin. Slimegoblin is a peaceful creature that existed hundreds of years ago. They are very weak in battle and led a hermit lifestyle. However, due to the worldwide drought on the continent, they are completely extinct as a species. There was complete devastation on the battlefield. All the applicants fled from fear. Who went where, and no one dared to speak out against the thunder dragon. So the thunder dragon was walking alone in this field. Lime looked down at this monster and said that well, now. The thunder dragon looked at him in anticipation of what he would do. Lime used dark magic, acceleration. He was determined and said they would see who was who. Then he rushed into battle with this thunder dragon. The thunder dragon's attack didn't keep him waiting long either. He immediately attacked him with his power. However, this did not frighten Lime at all. He deftly dodged his attack. But the thunder dragon wasn't going to give up either. He was releasing small electric balls. However, even here Lame showed himself in all his glory with the help of his power, which he recently applied. He quickly deftly dodged these electric balls. The thunder dragon was ready to strike the next blow. However, he did not have time to do it, as Lime hit him in the face. The thunder dragon staggered from such a force and fell on its side. After which Lime attacked him again, so that the thunder dragon flew with such force into the wall that it broke through it. The wall began to collapse and stones were falling. Lime finally stepped onto the ground and just watched the whole spectacle. Applicants who did not decide to fight this monster ran away, because they could be covered with stones. However, the thunder dragon was not defeated yet. It wasn't that he wasn't hurt, there wasn't even a single scratch on him. But apparently, this was also part of Lime's plan. He looked fearlessly at the thunder dragon and said that now that they were alone, then they would play seriously. The Gram dragon seemed to understand what he meant and growled loudly. But it wasn't just a roar. The thunder dragon summoned the thunderclouds. After that, it suddenly darkened and the whole sky was covered with black clouds. The whole sky was studded with small yellow storm clouds. But Lime wasn't scared at all. He said it was great. The thunder dragon decided to summon Gram clouds, as he expected. Apparently, Lime already had a plan. Vampire Hague was very afraid, but still curiosity got the better of him. So he hid behind the wall of this academy, but still looked out as he was very interested. Lime noticed him and imperceptibly moved behind him. He took his sword and said he would borrow it. It wouldn't be for long. After that, he also quickly left there. Vampire Hague didn't even have time to figure out what happened here, just looked back, hoping to see someone. However, Lime has already left. Vampire Hague asked what's what. After that, Lime with the Vampire Hague sword in his hands rose into the sky. He used dark magic, elemental coating. Those dangerous yellow lightning bolts were flashing everywhere in the sky. However, Lime needed it. He raised the sword up in order to charge it with electricity. The thunder dragon only looked at him questioningly, not understanding what he wanted to do. When the sword was fully charged with electricity, Lime used the Sword of Darkness strike. This attack was called Thunderclap. After that, the shockwave was aimed directly at the thunder dragon. The frightened dragon only glanced at this attack, but did not have time to do anything, as everything happened very quickly. There was a strong blow, a lot of dust rose again, so no one could see how it ended. But when the dust settled, they all saw that the thunder dragon had been defeated. But apparently, Lime was not interested at all. A system window appeared in front of him, in which it was written that the quest of rebirth, awakening of level 3 was completed. New spells were now available to him. And also for killing the thunder dragon, he was rewarded with a sword called Mjolnir. Someone was peeking out from behind the stone pillars and looking at Lime. It was the same man who told them the new rules. He looked a little puzzled and, adjusting his glasses, said that it was the first time he had met such a non-standard individual. So he decided he should report him to the director. All the students were very scared and pressed themselves against the wall. Even the vampire hag, who despised Lime, looked scared. Lety alone looked at Lime with surprise and admiration. She was still sitting on that huge slime that Lime had dropped her on. Lime adjusted his hood and indifferently said that it looked like the combat trials were over. The examiners retired in order to analyze all their records and make a verdict. So all applicants had to wait for the results. A couple of hours later, the backyard of the academy has suffered quite a lot, but there was no one there. By this time, the results of this exam were posted on a banner in the main square of this magic academy. Lety and Lime came to the main square in order to look at their results and find out if they got there at all. On this banner it was written that these were the results of the 8349 entrance exam. There were only 2 candidates to join. This dues included number 153 without a name, race, Goblin, and number 154 Tiara Letizia Nilf, race, Dark Elf. Apparently, all those who did not dare to somehow speak out against this Thunder Dragon did not pass this exam. When Lety saw the results, she was very happy and, turning to Lime, said that she had no doubt that he would pass this exam. However, for some reason she was enrolled anyway, although she doesn't mind, but still. Lime interrupted her and said that she was the only one who challenged the dragon, wasn't she? Lety folded her arms on her chest and said that if that was the only reason, then yes, it was logical. Lime looked at her puzzled and asked her that her full name was Tiara Letizia Nilf, wasn't it? Lety looked at it again and said yes, but it was too long, and that's why he should just call her Lety. Then she remembered something and said that for sure. Lime didn't understand what was going on and looked at the girl questioningly. Lety took out a pen from where and went to the banner where the candidates for entry were indicated, crossed out without a name and wrote that his name was Lime. Then she turned to Lime and, smiling, said that's it. He has a name now, doesn't he? Lime smiled sheepishly. After the results of this exam were announced and they were invited to some bright room. There was the same man who gave them the uniform. Lety and Lime have already adjusted their new uniforms. Unlike Lime, Lety was very happy and said that what a cool uniform. The man also brought them something else and said that these were their textbooks and robes. After which Lety and Lime immediately put on their robes. The man said that they are now in the hostel. And also before joining, they need to pass a qualifying test to get a place in this hostel. Lime looked displeased at this man and asked, "What is another test?" The man said yes, because you are their academy dorms divided by the level of magic that is contained in their body. It was useless to argue with this man, so the 2 candidates agreed with him. After some time, this man brought some strange thing. She looked like a white top hat. The students of this academy crowded together and decided to look at this spectacle. Lime noticed them and looked at them with displeasure. Lep did not pay any attention to this at all, as she was very worried before this test. This man looked at them with contempt and maliciously said that he wondered how they would pass this test. The students of this academy started whispering about them. One of them asked that these 2 would pass his test. Or what? Someone said that he had heard that it was very tough this year, and only 2 passed it. They stared at these candidates again and said that, although at first glance you wouldn't say that they were capable of anything. Lety broke down again and got angry. However, Lime blocked her way and told her to calm down, because now it doesn't matter at all. The girl looked at him questioningly, but stopped appearing. She told him he was too kind to them. Lime did not pay attention to this remark at all and turned to the man, whom he asked, "What is the essence of this test?" The man said it was very simple. They would have to stand in front of the device he had just brought here, and it would automatically analyze the amount of dark magic in their body. They will just need to touch the panel with their palm, and their result will be immediately displayed on the screen. This man was obviously pleased with himself and said that this device is the latest model. The academy recently allocated money for it, so they were very lucky to get it. He looked at them again with contempt and said that that was why it was simply impossible to fool this device. Apparently, he really wanted to catch them. After that, he looked at these 2 candidates and said that it would be Miss Lety anyway, and invited her to this strange apparatus. The girl gathered her strength and said yes. After that, she went to this device and put her palm. As this man said, her result was immediately highlighted in front of her. Seeing this result, the man was very surprised and asked what is it. Their arrogant examiner was very shocked by Lety's result. He even looked at the result with a bit of horror and asked what it was. Its result was announced on the system panel. It was written that her race was a dark elf. Her intelligence, 9,600. Her strength, 3,300. Dark magic was 32,000. Physical strength was 200,800. Lime studied Lety's stats carefully, but he didn't look surprised. He calmly thought that, and here are her indicators. He carefully studied each of her indicators and thought that there was just an amazing amount of dark magic in her body. As expected from a dark elf princess, she has a huge potential. Apparently, Lime was very happy to meet such an outstanding girl from the dark elf race. But there was no envy in his words either. He was sincerely glad and impressed with its result. He calculated and thought that if she continued to develop her abilities further, then in the future she would become an excellent warrior. While Lime was thinking about all this, the next system window appeared. It has already been mentioned here about which hostel it should be settled in, and the system identified a suitable dormitory for the student, and it was the Lucifer Dormitory. The students who crowded together to watch this interesting and exciting spectacle, as well as to discuss all this, were shocked by this result. And naturally, this prompted even more discussions. The students did not even try to talk quieter. There was a noise in the hall. Everyone wanted to speak out on this and discuss everything. One of the students was very surprised and asked that she was enrolled in the Lucifer Dormitory, wasn't it? The strongest magicians of their academy also live there. Another student who was standing next to that one asked that she was a princess of rare times and dark elves, wasn't she? He said that was probably why the system enrolled her in this hostel. Apparently, the dark elf race was really very strong and always impressed everyone with its strength. Their examiner did not immediately speak, apparently listened to the admiring and surprised conversations of the students, or perhaps he was just very angry that Lety not only passed this test, but passed it very well and got into the best dorm. After that, when their examiner managed to control himself but still clicked with displeasure, he said that the next one would be Lime. Apparently, he now decided to take it out on him since it didn't work out with Lety. But despite all this, Lime very calmly came forward and said yes. After that, he also went to this magic cylinder. The examiner sighed wearily and said that although they would measure his strength, he did not expect much from him. Apparently, he couldn't help but mock him, because after all, Lime belongs to the goblin race, and before meeting Lety, he didn't even have a name. But this attitude did not upset him at all and did not care, because he came here for only one reason, and he will achieve this no matter what. The examiner measured him with an appraising look and added that he was a goblin after all. But Lime was not going to pay attention to his words. He ignored such insults and quibbles, because in his whole life he had experienced events and much worse. So he calmly raised his hand and placed it on the magic cylinder. He didn't worry about it at all, because he knew that he was strong, and thought that he had checked his indicators for a long time. A lot of time has passed since then. I wonder how much stronger he has become. He concentrated and released all his strength. The examiners looked at him in fright and asked, "What is it?" The entire room in which this final test took place was plunged into darkness. And then something happened that no one expected. This magic cylinder collapsed and crumbled into small pieces from an overabundance of Lime energy. All the students covered their faces with their hands and tried to stand on their feet as this shockwave reached them, all of them. Everyone froze in surprise, shock and horror and could not utter a word. Only the examiner did not restrain himself. He looked at him with horror and asked what was going on. Lime himself was horrified by this and swore to himself. He wanted to show all his strength, but he didn't want it to turn out like this. The examiner shook all over with anger and could not stand it anymore and shouted that it was the latest device, and it was worth as much as 500 gold. Lime just sighed and scratched his head to blame, said that cars break down and this happens. He really felt guilty and didn't know what he was supposed to say at all. The examiner was still very angry. He told him that this device had been bought by the academy quite recently before him, and it worked fine before him. He asked him what to do with his test now. Now Lime felt guilty for this and, apologizing to the examiner, said that he did not want it to happen like this. But the examiner didn't even want to listen to him, because it was necessary to cling to at least something in order to accuse him, and this case came just in time. He pointed at it with his finger and shouted that it was just fine. Then, as a punishment, he will place him in the weakest dormitory of all. Lety, who was already joyfully standing in the crowd, apparently, she was sure that she and Lime would be in the same dorm. But this news made her mad again. She was obviously unhappy with this result and asked what. But the examiner did not pay any attention to the dissatisfied cries and questions, because they had already made a decision, so no one could convince him. Lime didn't like it either, but he didn't argue with it, because he knew perfectly well that no one would listen to him. So he just thought that if he was determined to be the worst dorm, then he would never meet with the director at such a pace. Now his thoughts were only about this, because if this happens, it will be much more difficult for him to achieve his goal. He was very upset by this decision, but he himself understood that he overdid it here. And the students were happy about this, because they had a new topic for conversation. So they joined together in small groups and hurried to share their impressions of what they saw with each other. But they were also glad that it didn't happen to them, so maybe someone even laughed at Lime. And besides, he was a goblin. In the ranks of the students stood the same man who was with them on their last exam when they fought with the Thunder Dragon. It was he who led the whole process then, and now he was standing in the ranks of students. He stared at Lime and stared at him for a long time, and was obviously pleased that he was assigned to the worst dorm. After all, he didn't want him to get here at all. Lime guiltily lowered his eyes and thought that he would have to come up with another way to meet him. Apparently, there was nothing else for him to do, so he just accepted this decision and decided to look for other ways to achieve his goal. Meanwhile, all their exams had all ended and it was already late evening. So all the students have long since dispersed, pleased with the sight they saw. The events take place in the Magic Academy, a dormitory of the lowest rank of Sierra. That's where Lime was identified. It was a separate small and shabby house. Lime went into his small room. Lime apparently lived alone in the room. He sat down wearily on his bed and began to think about the whole day. A system panel popped up in front of him, which he stared at. He looked very tired and battered, and he was also very upset because his plan did not go the way he intended. He thought that his main goal at the moment was to become the best student of this Magic Academy. Apparently, he did not feel sorry for himself for a long time and immediately began to look for solutions and, most likely, had already come up with something. He thought that this way he could meet with her director and kill him, so he will seize all the territories that belong to him. He closed his eyes and thought that, however, because of his own mistake, he was enrolled in the dormitory from the lowest rank. And what should he do now? Maybe in the future he will be able to transfer to Lucifer's dorm with Lety, but he still needs to try to pull this off. Then he opened his eyes and noticed a book that was lying on the table. Or rather, on a piece of paper that was lying inside this book. He was interested in it. So Lime went to the table and took out this piece of paper from the book. He said it was his chance. Apparently there really was something important on this piece of paper. Lime didn't waste any more time and went instead where he could in this case. He went to the window where the girl was sitting, who asked him that he wanted to apply for a magic tournament, didn't he? Lime showed her this piece of paper and said yes. Apparently, this piece of paper was a document that had to be filled out in order to participate. It was an academic magic tournament. This tournament is held once a year in order to identify the strongest magician of their students of this academy. This tournament is an age-old tradition of the academy and anyone can participate in it. The winner receives a prize personally prepared by Director Deer. Lime thought that, simply put, the prize itself would be awarded personally by the director of this magic academy. It's just a great chance to meet him. The girl looked very puzzled and asked that he had entered the Magic Academy only 2 days ago, didn't he? Apparently, there were some problems with the application for this tournament, and perhaps because he belongs to the Goblin race, the weakest of all races, she did not take him into account and very much doubted that he would be able to do anything there at all. But Lime did not pay any attention to this, because he had a goal in front of him that he just needed to achieve. And he would do everything for this. So he nodded positively and said yes. The girl told him that magic tournaments are a rather dangerous event. He understands that, doesn't he? Apparently, she tried to dissuade him or warn him. Then she added that at least anyone can participate. However, freshmen are not recommended to appear at the tournament. She was still trying to talk him out of it. But Lime wasn't going to back down. He understood what he was getting at, so he interrupted him and said that yes, he knew. And he still wants to take part in this tournament. The girl realized that it was useless to argue with him, so she sighed with displeasure and told him to wait a couple of minutes. After that, the girl took his piece of paper, which he brought, and began to fill it out. After that, she contacted someone with the help of a magic crystal that stood in front of her right on the table. She said that a strange freshman came to them to record. She contacted the same man who took their last exam. He asked the girl through the same magic stone and asked that it was the same kid who broke the measuring device, wasn't it? The girl asked that she should refuse his application, thereby answering his question in the affirmative. The guy grinned nastily and said that no, she should let him sign up for this tournament. He must have already started to have a plan to get rid of Lime, so he didn't mind, because if Lime took part in the tournament, then it would be very easy to get rid of him. The girl said she understood. After that, she handed Lime his piece of paper back and said that she accepted his application to participate in this magical tournament. But she warned him and said that, however, he should keep in mind that the organizers will not be responsible for his safety at this tournament. Lime said yes, he understands that. After all the issues were resolved and Lime received consent to participate in this magical tournament, he left this girl and thought that this was his chance, which he simply had to take advantage of. King Deer must wait for him. Magic Academy, Lucifer's highest ranked dormitory. The female half. No one has slept in the dorm yet. Now the girls decided to take a shower after a hard day. The room was spacious and bright. There were many booths where you could wash, so there was no crowd there. Lety was there too. She looked happy, though a little tired. She really had a busy day, but the outcome of this day clearly did not disappoint her. She had already washed and turned off the water, but Lety was in no hurry to get out. She was still standing in the shower and thought that, nevertheless, she was so lucky to meet Lime. Apparently, he really impressed her. She thought he had even saved her life. She remembered the moment when he took her in his arms, and the two of them flew into the sky. It was just when they were passing the last exam and had to defeat the Thunder Dragon. She thought that he, like a prince, picked her up in his arms, and then he just threw it away. After that, the girl shook her head and asked what she was thinking about at all. After all, she finally came to her room. She had already changed into her sleeping clothes and was combing her hair. Lety was sitting very thoughtful. She said that still, when she looks at him, she sees something majestic in his figure. It's as if she can't take her eyes off him. It's like she never wants to leave him again. These thoughts made her very embarrassed and blushed. She asked why does her heart beat so hard when she thinks about him? Apparently, she still couldn't get him out of her head. It seems that he really made a strong impression on her. Meanwhile, in the Magic Academy, in the lower rank dormitory of Sira, deep into the night, since it was already the middle of the night, Lime also slept peacefully in his bed. But then, for no reason at all, his eyes snapped open. Lime didn't say a word. Apparently everything had been planned in advance. He quickly packed up and went outside. He quickly and without unnecessary movements climbed onto the roof of his dorm. He did it so easily and naturally as if he had taken off. Stopping there, he told the goblin priestesses to appear. Then a black portal appeared, from which the goblin priestess came out, and she said that she was already here. The girl was in a great mood as always. Lime didn't even look at her. He immediately got down to business and said that he had one request for him. He will need her abilities in order to. But his attention was attracted by the goblin priestess, who, for no reason, had already changed her clothes, as if she understood what he wanted to say, or maybe she was just fooling around. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked why she had degenerated into an academy. The goblin priestess explained to him that it was a disguise. Apparently, the whole situation amused her. Lime was very serious. He sighed, but did not argue with her because he understood that it was useless, and it didn't interfere with his plan in any way, so let her do what she wants, as long as it doesn't harm Lime's goals. He said it wasn't necessary, but let her do as she wants. He needs her to explore the school while using her skill called ghostliness. The goblin priestess smiled at him and said that everything would be fulfilled. Then he raised his head up and said that, but another guest arrived in time. It was a fairy who also appeared unexpectedly and greeted him. She looked, like Lime in principle, serious. She told him that she had delivered the girl to the village and right now, she was being looked after by his younger sister. Lime remembered this girl and thanked the fairy for her help. He was really very grateful to her, and it was nice to hear about his sister, because it is not known how soon they will meet. After that, he turned to her with a request and said that even though she had just returned, but could she, together with the goblin priestess, draw him a map of the academy? The fairy stared at him questioningly and asked, "What is Mapu?" Apparently, this was the first time she had heard these words, so she did not understand what was being said. Lime realized that he had said something wrong, so he hurried to correct himself and said that is, a map. He wants her to draw him a map of the academy area. The fairy sighed wearily. Apparently, all these flights really exhausted her, but she could not refuse him, since everything they are doing now concerns the goblin race and their future fate. So she said that's what he would have said right away. She agreed and said that yes, she would be able to draw a so-called map. And she asked that he was here, wasn't he? She understood perfectly well why he was doing all this. Lime said that's exactly the case, so they're heading to him right now. Their secret mission begins right now. Meanwhile, in the tower of the director of the Magic Academy, Lime decided to get right in there. He had already got there and climbed back onto the roof of the building. He once again applied his dark magic called shadow camouflage. No one could see him now. Lime thought it would help him partially conceal his presence. He went to the window and began to peer at what was happening there. It was a large room with a huge long table, at the head of which sat an old man. There were also several other people present. Apparently they gathered a council. This old man was the headman of the council, whose name is Wesker. Next to him on the right side sat the chief secretary of the Department of Magic Tournaments, whose name is Mylene. And on the left side of the old man sat Eddie's teacher. Also there was the president of the student council, Dragon Boy, whose name is Kia. Eddie's teacher, as always, adjusted his glasses and said that he was very dangerous. You can expect anything from this freshman. Apparently they were discussing Lime. Eddie's teacher threw some paper on this long table and said that it was completely unsuitable for their academy. Its existence here violates all the age-old traditions of their educational institution. The headman of the council looked at Mylene and asked that he was the only one who was able to defeat the Thunder Dragon at the entrance test, wasn't he? Mylene confirmed it and said yes. They didn't even expect that at least someone would be able to defeat him. However, they were probably very wrong. The headman of the council thought about it and said that, and he is unusually strong. Eddie's teacher could no longer control himself. He jumped up and said that their school accepts not the strongest, but the noblest. This student is just a goblin and is a representative of the lowest race. It's just unthinkable. They can't let him study at their academy. How will they be able to look their director in the eye after all this? The headman of the council remained as calm as ever and asked the teacher, Eddie, what? And that's why he decided to let him participate in the magic tournament. Mylene grinned and said that was right. After all, students should be warned in advance about the risk in the tournament. Death in these battles is not news. Anything can happen in this arena if, of course, they understand what she is talking about. The headman of the Soviets did not tell her anything. He sighed and thought that, as always, they had a cardinal decision. Such a minor problem. Eddie's teacher kept insisting on his own and said that, moreover, this kid is a goblin. How could they even admit him to the exam? Mylene told him that the headman allowed anyone to participate in the entrance exams. Eddie's teacher asked if he was the only one worried about the preservation of the glorious traditions of their academy. Lime, who was still eavesdropping on their conversation, thought that everyone had the right to enter the academy. However, not everyone is happy to see a goblin here. The headman of this council squinted at the window where Lime was standing and looked carefully there. He thought about something and said that since they decided to act, then so be it. He got up from his seat and said that was it. It's time for him to get ready for bed. After that, the headman of the council left. Mylene looked at the door through which the headman had just left and asked if he really approved of all their actions so easily. Somehow it's not very similar to the headman. Eddie's teacher called out to Kia. The man immediately got up and said yes. Eddie's teacher told him to adjust the competition table so that in one fight this goblin would meet a representative of their race. After all, they are the pride of their academy, so he should get rid of this misunderstanding. Lime was still listening attentively to their conversations and thought that the dragon man, well, okay, he would be happy to fight him. Mylene was clearly amused by the whole situation. She grinned and thought that the aristocrat was directing all his forces in order to get rid of some goblin. Laughter. And that's all. Eddie's teacher was just furious and told her that she just didn't understand a damn thing. Lime pulled his hood up better so that his face could not be seen and thought that he would not hear anything interesting here anymore. So he decided to leave here. He came back to the roof of his dorm, where he was supposed to meet the goblin priestess and the fairy. The goblin priestess, who immediately appeared, went to the point and said that of the interesting finds. She was silent for a while. Apparently she remembered everything. Then she said that in the library of this academy she discovered a secret passage to the dungeon, which is located behind the bookshelves. The fairy was holding a folded piece of paper in her hands. She took out this piece of paper and told Lime that, and she drew a map of the academy as he asked her. Lime took this card and thanked them all for their help. He said that was it for today. Then something caught his attention. He looked at the small lawn that was not far from their dorm. He asked what else is there? He saw a guy who was training now, even though it was late at night. But it was not obvious from his appearance that he was not going to finish, but he had been studying for clearly not the first hour. He practiced very hard with his sword. Lime was very interested in this guy. He turned to him and began to watch him closely. He said he was very surprised to train late into the night. The fairy had told him that he had been training here ever since she started mapping this magic academy. He's a representative of the kobold race, it seems, and he also comes from a lower race and lives with him in the same dormitory. Lime said that's how it is. This guy was still training and apparently didn't even want to stop. Lime said that it's not easy for everyone to live in this world in their own way. And, apparently, he remembered how hard it was for him and his sister, but now everything is slowly getting better, although there is also a small problem that Lime is now dealing with. But Lime did not watch this cob for a long time, so he hurried back to his room. He took off his raincoat and hung it over the back of a chair, and he was about to go to bed, but then he saw a fairy who occupied his bed and told her, displeased, to listen to him. The fairy, who had already collapsed and was about to go to bed, asked what he needed. Lime asked what she was doing in his bed. The fairy resentfully asked him that wasn't she cute. Apparently, she just wanted to make fun of him. He asked him what about such a beautiful fairy? How can she sleep on a chair or on the floor? And invited him to sleep together. The fairy was clearly mocking him. Apparently, she was really very tired all day, so she decided to just make fun of someone. And Lime was very well suited for this. She asked that didn't he dream of sharing a bed with a beauty like her. Lime waved off wearily and said that if he tossed and turned in his sleep, then he would be able to pin her down, so. But the fairy, apparently, already understood what he wanted to tell her. After that, a pink cloud appeared on his bed. When the cloud cleared, Lime saw a fairy, which has now become human-sized. And I asked him what, and if so. Lime was already terribly tired and told her that he really asked her to just let him sleep. Apparently, he just couldn't play along with her anymore, and the day turned out to be difficult, in principle, as always. The fairy said she gave him the bottom, she was just joking. If the goblin goddess finds out about her prank, she will be punished immediately, and his sister will still be jealous. She turned into a little fairy again and, stretching tiredly, said that okay, she went to bed, and wished him good night. When the fairy finally fell asleep, Lime exhaled and, going to the table, said that before going to bed, he needed to sum up some more results of what he had learned. He opened a piece of paper and thought that tomorrow would be a very difficult day. The same magic academy, early morning in the dining room. There were already a lot of students in the cafeteria who came here to have breakfast before classes. Lime, too, had already taken his portion and took a seat at the table. Then in the distance he saw Lety, who was communicating very well with two girls. Apparently, she was really very happy here. Then Lety noticed Lime, so she waved to him. Two of her friends just stared at her questioningly. Lime also waved his hand slightly to her, as he did not want to attract too much attention to himself. And he himself thought that, as he thought, it was not so easy to maintain communication with a girl who lives in the most elite hostel if she was at the very bottom himself. He started eating again, and he was holding the same piece of paper in his hands and thought that the magic tournament would begin in 5 days. He was approached by some guy with a tray on which there was breakfast and asked what he would get hooked on. Lime did not object and said that it was fine. It was the same guy who trained last night. He thanked him for letting him sit next to him. Lime looked at him and thought it was the same guy. The guy asked him that he was new to the Sierra dorm, wasn't he? He's from there too. Lime said yes, and now they will be acquainted. Then the guy said that he had overheard here and asked if it was true that he had applied for a magic tournament. Lime said it was true. The guy looked very happy and said that's how it is. In fact, But then some very arrogant guy came up to him from behind and interrupted him in mid-sentence. He hugged him sharply and told him to listen to him. He asked who allowed him to eat at the table. Lime has already tensed up, but has not done anything yet. The kobold shook all over and called out to this guy, whose name is Nero. Still, students can have lunch in the dining room, but he said it very hesitantly. Apparently, this guy really scared him very much. Nero asked who let the dog into the dining room. He has to eat in the trash, did he understand that? Kobold was very offended by all these words, and he said that no, he hadn't broken any rules. He didn't even do anything. Nero was already on edge and asked what was he doing there. Then he couldn't stand barking and got into their conversation. He grabbed this Nero by the hand and said that was enough, looking the guy straight in the eye. Nero looked arrogantly at Lime and asked what, and who else is he? Lime calmly told him that he was a goblin, and he asked if he couldn't have lunch here since he was from a lower race. Nero asked, what does a novice goblin mean? Let him explain the local rules to him now in a brotherly way. Two of his comrades behind him chuckled. Nero flexed his fists and asked him if he didn't mind. Limes himself grinned and said that yes, he was only in favor. Let them enlighten him. Cobalt was very worried about his new friend and thought about what he should do. He got into this fight because of him. Lime and Nero were facing each other. The kobold stood next to them and looked at them in fright. He was very worried about Lime, because he didn't know how strong he was. But Lime was holding up very well. He wasn't scared, his face didn't express anything. Nero also flexed her fists and said that it looked like their newcomer should be taught a lesson in discipline. After that, without warning him about anything, I decided to hit him with my fist. Lime didn't even move. He raised his hand and easily repelled Nero's blow. Nero did not expect this in any way, so he was very shocked. He asked what the hell. Apparently, he is used to keeping all the weak at bay. But I never expected that this weakling would be able to resist him. Kobold was no less surprised than Nero. However, unlike Nero, he was very happy for his new friend. He just looked at him questioningly. This look expressed both fright and admiration. Lime easily intercepted Nero's hand, who wanted to hit him and thought that he should not use magic in front of other students. After all, he understood that this could be followed by not the most favorable consequences for him, so that's why he'll have to finish it the old-fashioned way. He squeezed his hand hard. Now Nero was already a little scared and asked what the fuck. There was almost nothing left of his arrogance. Due to the fact that Lime squeezed his hand hard, Nero could not stand on his feet and fell straight to his knees. He told him to let him go and called Lime a fucking goblin. He was very shocked by his strength and asked where did he get such strength from. Nero's two friends, who were standing behind his shoes, are surprised and scared no less than he is. Lime squeezed his hand even tighter, then let go. His fingerprints were left on his hand. As soon as Lime let go of his hand, Nero fell to the floor and grabbed his sore arm, which Lime twisted. Lime calmly sat down next to him, and he called out to him, calling him the elder. In an imperious tone, he said that everyone could dine in this dining room, and asked if he understood it. Nero was still confused and, looking up at him, asked what was what. Then one of his friends called out to him and said that this first-year student. Apparently, the guy himself was very worried and scared of Lime, so he couldn't finish the sentence right away. After that, he gathered his strength and said that according to rumors, this guy defeated the dragon in the entrance exams alone. Then Nero was really scared. He knew he couldn't hold out against Lime, so he had no choice but to retreat. He got to his feet and told his friends that they were leaving. He pointed his finger at Lime and told him that he was not a tenant anyway. He was spotted by the Draken people, a faction called the Breath of Flame. Despite all the pain and fear, Nero still grinned and asked what was interesting. How would he cope with them? After which, this arrogant trio left the hall. Lime just sighed wearily. Then a kobold came up to him and thanked him, and he also apologized to him for having to get into this fight because of him. But Lime told him he was fine, so he shouldn't take it into his head. Kobold said that he had actually applied to participate in this magic tournament as well. Kobold tightened his grip on his sword and said that if he won, he could wipe their noses. However, he looked at his image and said that he was such a weakling and he couldn't even give them back. It's even ridiculous to think that he can win there at all. Lime didn't answer him. Only after that, the kobold was able to look up at him and look at him. Then he remembered something and said that for sure. He didn't even introduce himself. Lime said it was okay and introduced himself first, saying his name was Lime. The dog said his name was Buttercup. Arcady's Buttercup. This surprised Lety very much, and he asked what. He went up to him and asked, "What's Buttercup?" "So his name is Arcady's Buttercup, isn't it?" Buttercup was surprised by such a question and such behavior of Lime. He said that, well, yes, and asked if he had met him before. Lime was still in severe shock and said no. He pursed his lips and told him not to lie to his head, because it's just, and he himself thought that Arcady's Buttercup. In the future, this young man will cope with a multi-million army alone, and he will also be the strongest swordsman on this continent. Among his enemies, he will be known as the Black Knight. Apparently, all his efforts that Buttercup is making now, how he tries and gets very tired. All this will not go in vain, and he will become the strongest. Lime looked at Buttercup again. Buttercup smiled at him and looked at him questioningly. Magic Academy, the lowest dormitory of Sierra. After lunch, Buttercup and Lime went to the dorm. There they said goodbye, and Buttercup said that okay, he would go. Lime said see you later, but then Lime abruptly stopped Buttercup and asked him to stop. Buttercup looked surprised and asked what is it. Lime told him that if he wanted to, he could train with him at night. Buttercup, hearing this, was horrified, because he thought that no one saw him and asked if he really saw him. But in fact, he was very happy with such an offer and said that he was only in favor. He will be very happy to train with him together. He offered to meet him today, however. But then Lime interrupted him and said that from now on he should be honest with him. Buttercup was very surprised by such a request and even shuddered. He stared at Lime in surprise and asked him what. Lime calmly explained this request to him and said that his younger sister, unless, of course, he was mistaken, was the reincarnation of one of the 7 great divine demons. Now a service is being held at the Dark Temple on the territory of the Overcoat. Buttercup did not cease to be surprised by his awareness and asked that how did he know this. Lime explained to him that there are various rumors around his family and even at the academy, and now he has to listen to it very carefully. After all, his sister is soon to go with the missionaries to the village, which is located on the border with the territory of the people. He should warn her that they are very dangerous there. It's better for her to stay at home. If Buttercup does as he asks, then they will be even for that incident in the dining room. Lime looked at Buttercup, very serious, said that let his sister be very careful, and asked if he understood it. Buttercup was very shocked by this information, said that he understood. After that, they said goodbye again, and Lime said that then fine, see you soon. When Buttercup left, a fairy flew around Lime. She asked him that he was up to something again, didn't she? Lime said it was possible, and he himself thought that this information should change Buttercup's life. In the game, due to carelessness, his sister dies, and Buttercup is disappointed in everyone and goes into seclusion, while becoming a machine for killing people. But if his sister survives, then he will soon be reborn as a deity on the continent. A few days later, deep at night, the forest behind the Magic Academy. Today Lime and Buttercup decided to arrange their night training. They prepared very well and chose a rather convenient place. No one bothers them here, especially in the dead of night. This place was right in the waterfall. On the trees at different levels, they hung up the targets they were supposed to hit. The first one had to hit the Lime targets. He came out in the middle of this place and created a magic ball in his hand. Then he hit the target exactly. Lime said it wasn't bad. Behind him, Buttercup was practicing with his sword. He concentrated, then with the help of his sword knocked down the stones that were at the top of the waterfall. Buttercup was very happy that he had succeeded and said that he had succeeded. He happily turned to Lime and said that he was able to make such a cut with an ordinary sword. Lime was not surprised at all, because he always believed in him and said that he trained every night, so such a result was quite expected. But Buttercup was still very happy and said no. It's all thanks to his advice. He didn't know that his strikes could be improved by simply enchanting his sword. So if it wasn't for Lime, he wouldn't have found out. He asked him what and how did he end up in Sierra's dorm. It just has to be some kind of mistake, because he's so strong. Apparently, he was really surprised by this. Lime was very strong and skillful. Lime was very grateful to him for these words and thanked him for such kind words. They had already finished with their training, so Buttercup wiped his sword and put it back. He looked into the reflection of his sword and said that tomorrow is the first day of the tournament, and this is their last training session before the start. Apparently, he was very worried about this tournament. He trained a lot for a very long time, so he didn't want to screw up. He wanted to show his best side. But I was still not sure of myself. Lime, as if reading his thoughts, asked what he was worried about, didn't he? Buttercup. He did not answer anything to this, but Lime understood everything without words. He decided to support him and said that in such a short period of time he had achieved just an excellent result. He did not give up and continued to stand his ground, despite the fact that everyone considered him a weakling. His true strength is determination. And besides, training with him every night, he realized something. He paused for a moment, apparently letting Buttercup think it all over, after which, he told him that his true abilities had not been fully revealed. Buttercup was confused about such praise and asked what the true abilities were. Lime said yes. Usually hidden forces like his are revealed with a strong emotional shake. And to be honest, he would like to avoid this for him. After all, if such things happen, then he will, of course, gain strength, but he will finally lose his mind. People smiled at him and looked inquiringly, said that he did not quite understand what he was talking about. However, he does not want to become strong in this way. Lime sighed and told him not to take it into his head, because it was just his thoughts out loud. But Lime said it wasn't for nothing. He understood that Buttercup might not understand him or not take his words seriously. However, perhaps someday he will remember them, and he will need them. This warning may one day even save him from some kind of trouble. Then Lime asked him to close his eyes for a second. Buttercup was very surprised by such a strange request. However, he agreed and said yes, of course. After that, Buttercup closed his eyes, and Lime used his dark magic, which was called shadow analysis. But what he saw or felt surprised him very much. However, he expected this. He thought that as he thought, it was almost all of his dark magic that was in a sealed state. It's like these iron chains are keeping a rabid beast under control. And he grew up with similar restrictions all his life. And he will become much stronger if you remove all these shackles from his body. However, the indestructible power from the strongest swordsman on the continent, Buttercup must awaken himself. Last time, the impetus for his growth was a tragedy that changed his entire future life. After he analyzed all of Buttercup's abilities and realized what his problem was, he called out to him and told him not to move. After that, his right hand turned into a huge scary paw with huge and long claws. These claws he drove right into his body. Buttercup felt a sharp pain. After carrying out such a strange painful procedure, Lime said that's it. He put his hand on Buttercup's shoulder, after which Buttercup himself opened his eyes. He looked very surprised and asked what, and he himself thought that it was as if he had just been pierced with stakes. What was it? Lime was about to leave and, turning to his friend, asked that their training was over for today, wasn't it? They need to go to rest already, because tomorrow will be a very hard day. Buttercup looked at his friend in surprise and agreed with him, saying that yes, he was right. It was early morning, and all the participants of the magic tournament went to the Colosseum. The opening ceremony of the magic tournament has begun. There were a lot of people who wanted to watch this tournament, but no less willing, who wanted to take part in it. The participants of this test entered the huge arena. People in the stands began to cheer them up and shout loudly. Lime and Buttercup were very collected and ready for this magical test. After that, the Dragonlids entered the arena. They went out together with Key, who apparently led them. After all the participants of the test came out, Mylene appeared, who announced that they had been waiting for a very long time. And now this day has come. The beginning of their beloved magic tournament. Did the students scream even louder? Mylene continued her speech and said that this event has been held by their academy since its foundation, and it did not leave anyone indifferent. The start of their tournament will be announced by their founders, the beloved director, Mr. Deer. So she sends him a greeting. After that, the director of this magic school himself showed up. Lime was watching him closely. After all, this director was the main reason why Lime came to this school. But the director appeared not just, but with the help of magic. Lime studied this phenomenon carefully and thought that it was magic like goblin kinship, wasn't it? But then he discarded these thoughts and thought that no, it looks like the connection is from another place, it's just a hologram. The director announced to them that their future strength is the Royal Demon Army. They have to show what they have learned in all the years they have spent at this academy. And there is only one rule. They must kill or be killed. They have to prove that their life is worth something. After their director said that, people screamed even harder. Lety looked very tense. Lime thought that the hidden goblin village was suffering from the tyranny of his rule. He will definitely win this tournament and kill this arrogant jerk. After they listened to all these announcements, there was a short break. Apparently, it was made specifically so that the participants of this magical tournament could prepare. So Lime was now standing on a large stone column along with a piece of paper in his hands, which he was studying very carefully. He thought that there were a total of 128 students participating in this magic tournament. In order to get to the final, he needs to win 6 times in a row. All he needs is just to give his all, starting with one duel. Oh, his first opponent will be. But just when he wanted to read his name and figure out what kind of person he was, someone leaned a cold glass with a cocktail against his face. Lime, from surprise and cold, screamed that it was cold. At this shout, all the students passing by turned around. Lime recoiled away from this cold drink and asked what was she doing. It was Lety. Lime's reaction amused her very much. She laughed out loud and asked why he was shouting like that. Then they decided to go outside and sit on a bench. She gave him his glass with a cocktail, which she brought especially for him. Now Lety looked pretty sad and thought that she had come to cheer him up just. She asked him that she did not understand why it was so sneaking up. Lime said come on to her, as if he had committed some kind of crime. Lety asked him that, by the way, isn't it forbidden for first-year students to participate in the tournament? But she answered her own question and said no, the rules don't say that. Lime looked at Lety in surprise and asked what is she interested in? And he himself thought that it was undesirable for first-year students to be there, but no one forbids them to participate. Lety apparently thought about something very much and said that yes, just like that. Lime understood her very well, apparently, and immediately suspected something was wrong. He asked her if something was really wrong. The girl immediately woke up and said that no, she was fine. After all, he just entered this academy, immediately signed up for this tournament. Apparently, she was very worried about him. She told him that he just seemed much calmer and more reserved to her, and he surprised her with such an act very much, that's all. But apparently Lime was much more surprised now than she was. He looked at her with such surprise, as if she had confessed her love to him. Lety felt as if she had said something superfluous and asked if she had said something wrong. Lime grinned and told her that yes, no, it's all right. And he himself thought again and thought that if Lety found out why he was taking part in this, then the same would reprimand him. Did that thought make him smile? Apparently, despite the fact that they had only recently met, they had already become very close and cherished each other and their friendship. Lety pouted and said he was being too mysterious today. But Lime continued to drink his cocktail and did not pay attention to her words. But then Lety remembered something and said that for sure. She handed him a small bag and told him to take it. Lema took her gift and looked at it questioningly. But when he opened it, he was very surprised and asked did she really decide to repay her debt? There was chocolate in this small bag. After all, in their first meeting, Lety ate chocolate, which his sister made Lime. And now the whole ridiculous situation flashed through his head again. At this moment, Lety was very embarrassed and said that it was obvious from her that the words were hard for her, but she pulled herself together and said that thanks to his chocolate, Then she was able to give her all in the entrance tests. Well, more precisely, she thinks so. The witch she decided to make him this chocolate as a sign of her gratitude for the help. Lime said it was understandable and asked her that she made this chocolate herself, didn't she? Lety immediately jumped up, all embarrassed and red, and said yes. However, he must not misunderstand her. But it was clear from her that she tried very hard when she made him this chocolate. All her fingers were wrapped in a band-aid. She told him it was just a way to apologize for what had happened, and nothing more. That's why he shouldn't take this chocolate too seriously. Lime tried process all the information that Lety brought to him and asked him to take chocolate seriously. Lety realized that she had uttered complete nonsense and said that no, he had misunderstood her. She closed her whole flushed face and asked what she was carrying. Lime looked at the girl and thought that he didn't know what she was talking about, but thank her very much for that. It was obvious from him that he was really very pleased to receive such a gift from her, albeit insignificant, but still. He even smiled at the thought. He thought it was the first time someone other than his sister had shown him such kindness. For him, it really was the first time in his life, because until that moment everyone treated him as a free labor force, and they never took him seriously, because he belonged to the weakest race, a goblin. Lety was still very confused by the whole situation and, looking at Lime, called him a fool. From such an unexpected turn of events, Lime shuddered and looked questioningly at the girl. Then they noticed the clock and Lety said that the tournament would start very soon. So now she has become serious again and decided to support her friend. She told him to beat them all up there. Then they got up and dispersed. Lime left first, as he was a participant in this tournament, and Lety was left there alone, trying to overcome her embarrassment. She didn't understand what was happening to her and asked what the hell was going on with her. Her heart still won't calm down. Meanwhile, the magic tournament has already begun and one fight has been announced. The host said then, and here are the participants of the first battle. A student from Sierra's dorm, a goblin named Lime. He distinguished himself from all the first-year students when he single-handedly defeated the Thunder Dragon. They should greet him with loud applause. And his opponents were the Dragon, man from the Lucifer Dormitory orphan Escudo. He is a member of a faction called Flame Breath, and their right-hand man. But all this was set up by Eddie's teacher, who very much wanted to get rid of this goblin Lime, and as soon as possible. The girls immediately began to cheer this dragon. They shouted to him that he was beautiful, as always. They were shouting at him to beat up that goblin. The teachers of this academy were sitting in a separate area. Mylene was sitting next to Eddie's teacher. For the woman, this duel showed everything very suspicious, and she asked if they were too suspicious in the first fight to expose a novice with the second strongest of the Dragonmen faction. Unlike the calm Mylena, Eddie's teacher was sitting on pins and needles. He explained it to her, so they're doing serious business here, not playing games. The start of the council was also there, but did not comment on anything, only closely followed the first two fighters. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the judge approached Lime and asked if he could provide him with a weapon. Lime thanked the judge, but refused, saying no. Escudo said it looks like this fight will end very quickly, and he grinned nastily. After that, the judge said that they were starting and announced the beginning of their battle. The dragon did not waste a second, immediately rushed into battle. He said he would be done with him instantly, and applied a skill of their faction called Wyvern Mode. He jumped high into the sky. All the girls were just delighted and said that he so elegantly soared into the sky. He's just going to smear this goblin on the ground. After that, from where he applied dark magic called magic coating and directed it directly at Lime. He rushed to him in order to finish him off and said that he was finished. But Lime remained as calm as ever and thought that this was somehow too easy for a dragon man. But then the ground began to crack under him. That's what Lime never expected. Chains came out of their lands along with vines and wrapped around his legs, and then all of him. Lime looked very worried. Lety was also very worried about him and asked what it was. Escudo, on the contrary, was very happy and thought that did he really think that he would fight honestly, and called him a jerk. Lime was chained to the ground, so he couldn't move. Meanwhile, Escudo had already approached him with his weapon and told him to die. But Lime was still very collected. Lime was chained to the ground and couldn't move. He looked scared now. After all, he understood that now he might not be able to cope, but he simply could not lose. After all, the entire goblin village is counting on him, and he also sensed something was wrong, so he instinctively looked towards the exit from this arena. And he did not lose. There he saw a girl also from this faction, and it was she who made it so that he was chained to the ground. She was the third strongest dragonman from the Flame Breath faction, whose name is Lena, and she is a descendant of a forest dragon and specializes in nature magic. Escudo was already flying straight at him and asked if he really thought he would fight him fairly and called him a jerk. Apparently, all this was planned in advance, and of course, not without the help of Eddie's teacher, who is now probably watching with a nasty grin how Lime is now not just defeated, but killed. Escudo shouted to him that, so he must die. Lime looked at him and realized that a collision was inevitable. However, there was no such fear in his eyes now. Apparently he had already thought of something. And after that there was a very strong blow. A lot of dust rose and stones flew in different directions. No one knew the outcome of this clash yet, but most of them were already, of course, happy that Escudo had won. The girls who supported Escudo were very happy and said that he had won. Lety, on the contrary, was very scared. She was very worried and shouted the goblin's name. But when the dust settled and the whole picture was revealed, no one expected this. Lime repelled Escudo's attack, and also continued to restrain him, and he did it without much difficulty. Lime used the summoning of the dark sword. It was the same sword he had received for completing the quest. Escudo didn't expect this either. He swore and asked what the hell. Now Escudo was at a loss, but he could not show it, otherwise he might lose. Lime didn't tell him anything, he just focused on their battle. After that, he moved behind him in the blink of an eye. Escudo did not have time to do anything and did not even have time to follow his movements. Everything was so fast. Now Escudo was already at a loss and could not hide it. And just at that moment Lime slammed him into the ground right on his face. Lime understood that after such a blow, his opponent could no longer stand up, so he turned to the judge and told him that it seemed he could no longer stand, so that the fight was over. The judge was no less surprised than the audience, so it took him a little time to recover. But after that, he announced that Lime was the winner, and then Lime already heard the joyful cries that were addressed to him. But Lime himself did not care about it. He was not interested in it, because he understood that they were all hypocrites, and no one would really appreciate him, and especially here. Everyone supported Lime. However, this did not please Eddie's teacher at all, who arranged all this in order to get rid of Lime. He just froze in horror. Eddie's teacher could not have expected this at all. He was completely confident that the Dragonmen faction had to cope with this, especially the second strongest Escudo. But Mylene, who was sitting next to him, was also shocked no less. The headman of the council was not surprised at all, as if he did not doubt him. Lime managed to interest him, but he didn't say anything, still looked at Lime and noticed something. He thought that his stock of dark magic was equal to the SSS rank. Lety was probably the happiest of all the spectators gathered here. Unlike everyone else, she was genuinely happy for Lime. She started jumping for joy and shouting that it was cool. It's just incredibly cool. She didn't doubt her friend for a second. After that, there was a short break between rounds, so Lime decided to unwind a little and tune into the next round. He again passed a descendant with stone columns. He was still very collected and thinking about the upcoming battle. He thought that even so, his one fight was over. But then he stopped abruptly and, looking ahead, was very surprised. His younger sister Lily came to visit him. Lime asked, "What is Lily really?" He never expected to see his sister here, so he was surprised. He thought that with her, and I thought it was the goblin girl he saved, wasn't it? I saved him then from a slaver, whom I also fooled very cleverly. They were both in the school uniform of this academy. Apparently, they put it on in order not to stand out. There was also a fairy with them, who, apparently, brought them here. And she set it all up. Lily was very happy to see her brother. The fairy immediately flew up to Lime and said that they wanted to see his fight. They told her that they simply had to support him. Perhaps the fairy objected at first, refusing to bring them here, but when something concerns her brother, Lily is always very stubborn, so she was able to persuade her. And this girl followed them, most likely because she was very grateful for the rescue, so she also decided to support him, thereby greatly surprising her savior. Lime froze in shock for a moment, then said that's how it was. Then Lily ran up to her brother. She looked at him with admiration and said that he had so coolly defeated that guy. The girl he saved also told him that he was just incredible. But still she looked very confused. Maybe she was just shy of him, or maybe even afraid, but still subconsciously trusted him. Lime also came up to them and patted the girls on the head and said that he was very glad that they liked it. He was really very pleased to see that his sister had come all this way in order to support her brother. Then a girl came up to him and handed him something. Apparently it was some kind of gift. She told him to listen, here. But the girl stopped. Apparently she was very shy of him, and besides, she didn't know him well. Lime didn't expect this from her, so he looked at her questioningly. The fairy, who was somewhere behind him, giggled, apparently found it funny. She realized that the girl herself would not be able to say anything, so she decided to act, said that the girls tried very hard for this he should look. Of course Lime accepted the gift from this girl. He picked it up and carefully opened it. It turned out to be a very appetizing and beautiful pie. Lime has never been given anything like this, or rather he has never been given anything at all, so this gift surprised him very much. But, of course, he was very pleased. He looked at the girl who gave him this pie and asked that her name was Miyu, wasn't it? Lime thanked his sister and Mia for that. Miyu hid from embarrassment behind Lily and told him to try his best in the next round. Lily happily said that they would cheer for him. Lime said that yes, he would definitely win. Meanwhile, in the waiting room of the tournament participants, Lime got up from the table and said that, as it was, the second battle would begin very soon. But then something caught his attention, and he turned around. A girl approached him and shouted that they were in trouble. It seems that his companions have suffered a lot. Vadim was very scared and asked what. The girl asked him to go to them right now. Lime said he was fine and immediately rushed to their aid. He immediately thought of his sister. He ran to some empty clearing, and the girl said that they should be here. Lime began to look around and asked what and where were they. But then this girl appeared behind his back and sneered nastily, asked what was true, where were they. Lime realized that he had fallen into her trap. He was specially called here in order to get rid of him in a dirty way. The girl used the same magic again and chained him to the ground. Lime said he just fell into their trap. He thought they were just taking advantage of his relationship with his younger sister to lure him here. He asked Lena that she was a member of the Flame Breath, wasn't she? Lena grinned. Lime said that, however, her trick does not work on him. After that, he easily tore the branches that bound him. But Lena wasn't surprised at all. She said yes. She has already realized this, but she will not be his opponents. And after that, he was surrounded by other members from that faction. Kia also came here. He said he didn't really care about the tournament and its rules. And right now, all the dragonmen will be his opponents. He pointed his finger at Lime and said that no one would come to his aid, and this place would become his grave. So he should prepare for his death and called him a pathetic goblin. Nolan didn't even look surprised. He was not at all frightened by the words of this dragon. Lena laughed and asked, "What is it?" He was speechless from fear, wasn't he? After which, the other dragons that surrounded him also laughed. Lime lowered his head and said that there were only 3 minutes left. The dragons did not understand him and asked what was what. Lime looked at each of them and said he had 3 minutes left. 3 minutes until the start of the next fight, so they'd better get it over with as soon as possible. This made Kia very angry. The dragon was furious at his words, so now he wanted to trample him even harder, and he would have done it even if it wasn't Eddie's teacher's order. He told him that if he wanted to die so badly, then he would help him with it. Then he released his flame. Lime also prepared for the attack and told him to show him what he could do there. Apparently, Lime deliberately exasperated the Draconoid. He did this in order for the dragon to use all his strongest techniques as soon as possible, because they spend the most energy, which means that it will be much easier to defeat him. And he himself thought that he needed to release as much dark magic as possible. After that, he looked at this dragon and said that he would at least stretch before the start of round 2. And then Kia applied the appearance of a dragon man called a salamander. Apparently, he was already starting to lose his temper a little, and even Lime's calm behavior really infuriated him. And then he used dark magic called fire magic, an explosion of primordial flame. Apparently, he was very determined towards Lime, so he was going to kill him. And also it was Eddie's teacher's order that he had to fulfill, so he couldn't screw up now. And after that, the dragon attacked him with his magic. But Lime didn't keep him waiting long either. He went into battle with him. He used his dark magic called Shadow Veil, so he easily stopped the flames of this dragon. However, these dragon decided to act very meanly. While Lime was busy stopping this attack, and in principle focused on Ki, another dragon attacked him and asked what he had forgotten about them. Several opponents attacked him at once, but the fact that Lime was busy with Ki did not prevent him from stopping these brazen dragon men in any way. Then Lime summoned his dark blade, and easily repelled all their attacks, while not even straining. And then he used Hellfire, so all those dragons who meanly decided to stop him and were defeated in an instant. But Kia didn't keep him waiting long either. He told Lime that he was rejoicing early. After that, he prepared for the next attack. He attacked Lime with a huge fireball, and he was also joined by other dragon men, who also released fireballs, and thereby made Kia's attack several times stronger. So now they were sure that Lime would not stand. They told him that he would definitely not escape a simultaneous attack. They were confident of their victory. But Lime didn't look scared, but on the contrary very determined, which angered the already irritable dragons. There was a feeling that he was ready for this meanness, so most likely he already had a plan. And at the same moment there was a huge explosion. The dragons began to rejoice and said that they had succeeded. After all, they were confident of their victory, and who could resist after such a powerful attack, much less some goblin. But it was not there. Now they were rejoicing early. Lime in the blink of an eye was transported to their backs. From there he attacked them. Since no one expected such an attack from him, no one could resist. So he dealt with all of them very quickly. There was only one enemy left, and it was Kia. The dragon was very shocked by this, and he asked what the hell. But there were still a few fugitives who wanted to escape. But Lime couldn't leave them like that, so he attacked them with his dark magic. And after that, the dragon was just furious. He shouted to him that how dare he. After that, he applied the final form of the dragon man, called the salamander, and he told Lime that he was definitely finished now. He still couldn't back down. Now it was no longer just an order from Eddie's teacher, but a personal revenge. Lime also used his dark magic called muscle strengthening. He was not at all afraid of an angry Kia, and with the help of his speed, Lime got ahead of him and struck first. He also quickly approached him and struck him right in the face. The blow was really very strong, so the dragon flew away. And while the dragon was unconscious, Lime struck him another blow. Dragon C growled in pain, and then he fell to the ground. So now Lime has definitely won up. Lime dusted off his clothes and said that, and so, at that moment, someone was peeking out from behind the wall. Apparently, it was the same girl who led him into this trap. Then Lime remembered something and said that for sure. He approached Lena and told her to listen. He asked her what time it was. The girl looked at him questioningly and asked what. After all, she did not expect this. She thought that he would now deal with her in the same way as with her comrades. Lime asked how much time was left before the start of round 2. Lena was very shocked, so it took her a while to figure it out. She looked at her watch and said there were 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. Lime just walked past her and said, well, that's great. He has to make it to the arena in time. From fear and overexertion, the girl fell down. After all, she thought that now she would definitely come to an end. Meanwhile, the start of round 2 at the Magic Academy was announced. The host called the Goblin Lime again. Lime entered the arena again. The host told him that his next opponent would be a dragon man, and it seems that he is late for the competition. And if he doesn't show up right now, then his absence will be counted as a technical defeat. After the time needed has expired, Lime was declared the winner. Lime scratched his head and wondered which one of them he was supposed to fight. Apparently, he remembered those dragons who ambushed him, but he looked a little upset now. Perhaps he wanted to fight one of them. His younger sister and Miyu, who was watching his duel, were also no less surprised than everyone else. Lily asked what? Did the fight end so quickly? Yes, how so? Eddie's teacher was terrified. His face twisted, and he couldn't stand it. Jumping up from his seat, he asked what before how is this even possible? Mylene, who was sitting next to him, did not pay attention to anything at all. Apparently she was very tired. Eddie's teacher was probably just furious that his plan had failed. The headman of the council, on the contrary, was glad of this victory and said that this boy turned out to be lucky. Lety was also very happy about Lime's victory. She shouted that it was just fine. Good luck is on their side now. Lily and that girl were also very happy. Lily said she didn't understand how it happened, but her brother won. Miyu said that's good. He won 3 more subsequent fights due to the fact that his opponents did not show up for the wallpaper. Apparently, they were all from the dragon faction, but they were all to blame for the fact that they could not come out against Lime. The judge declared Lime the winner again. Lime thought that this was not surprising, because he had already defeated all his opponents in the backyard. In the next round, the judge again declared Lime the winner. Eddie's teacher just couldn't look at it anymore. He was thinking of the next plan to destroy Lime. However, right now he was completely defeated, because he was counting on the help of Ki and his dragon factions. Mylene, as always, didn't say anything, just looked curiously at Eddie's teacher. However, his opponents still showed up for the final fight with Lime. And they were. Lime was very happy to see him and asked that he still came, didn't he? It's been a long time since they've seen each other. His opponents in this round were Arcadie's Buttercup. Now Dandelion was no longer like his former self. He wasn't such a plant anymore, he was holding up pretty well. Lime immediately scanned Buttercup. In the system window it was written that his name was Arcadie Buttercup. His race was still kobold, and the class became the Dark Knight. Lime, assessing him, thought that it seemed that the ability of the Dark Knight had already begun to awaken in him. His abilities showed up earlier than he expected. Buttercup came out onto the field and stood in front of him. It was obvious from him that he was there too. Very glad to see Lime again. He told him that, thanks to him, he was able to become even stronger, and he is very happy to meet him in the final. Lime thought that it seemed that Buttercup's sister hadn't died after all, so he was fine now, and I told him that he was also very happy to see him as his opponent. Dandelion did not waste time in vain and reached for his sword, which was hanging on his belt, and asked Lime what they would start. wouldn't they? Lime agreed with him and said yes. However, Buttercup let go of his sword and said that he would like to say so. However, he was silent for a moment and everyone froze in anticipation of what he would say now. Lime was waiting, too, just like everyone else. What will Buttercup tell him? But no one expected what Buttercup did. He put his hands up and said he was giving up. Lime asked what's what. He never expected this from his friend. Buttercup looked at him and said that he was really very grateful to him for everything he had done for him. And that's why he wants to somehow thank him for all this, and decided that in the final fight he would give this victory to him. Buttercup said it was very confident. Apparently, he foresaw in advance that Lime would win and had already decided that he would give the victory to him. But Lime upset his decision, and he said it wasn't fair. After all, he kept waiting for him to finally be able to fight him in the final. And since he is grateful to him, then let him be kind to fight him in a fair fight. Buttercup did not expect this from Lime, so for a moment he froze. But then he grabbed his sword again and asked his friend if he was sure about it. And since it's the one who's holding back, he won't. Lime was very happy that Buttercup's mood had changed and told him that it was just wonderful. And he himself thought that he was in anticipation. What had he achieved in such a short time? After that, Buttercup was the first to attack him and said that go ahead. Lime kept up with him and also rushed to him. The referee announced that the fight was starting. This fight was much more interesting than all the previous ones. It was a real fight, where neither side felt sorry for each other. It was the most honest fight of the whole day. Two friends with christened their blades, and neither of them was going to give in. Lime thought that in fencing, as expected, he has no equal. Buttercup really has become much stronger and more confident in this short period of time. Lime thought that it was all thanks to his Dark Knight magic. The bearer of this title receives tremendous physical abilities. However, he did not fully reveal his potential, so he's also not that strong. Everyone was caught up in this tough fight. Lily said that, and this guy is stronger than anyone who fought with her brother before. Miyu wished him luck. Lety couldn't say anything for a long time either. She, too, was captivated by the sight. After she recovered a little, she said how cool it was. Then Eddie's teacher also blew up, who shouted that he just didn't care who he was. He should just finish off this goblin already at last. Mylene couldn't help herself either and shouted for him to kick him. Only the elders didn't say anything, silently watching this fight. The fight was really just outstanding. None of the opponents were going to give up. They already know, but they were exhausted and barely held on, but still did not retreat. Buttercup pounced on Lime with renewed vigor and shouted for him to get, but Lime managed to dodge his attack at the last second. But then Buttercup was caught off guard. Lime shouted to him that he was finished now. The battle was fierce, none of them wanted to give up, and no one was eager to give in either. They were both very strong and fought on equal terms. So for the first time in this tournament, the audience became really interested. It was a truly breathtaking sight. Everyone took their breath away. But no one even expected this from these two, because they were both assigned to the Sulfur Dormitory, the weakest dormitory in this magic academy. And besides, both were also considered the weakest, because one belonged to the goblin race, and the second was a kobold, who was also constantly bullied. Lime almost wounded Buttercup, but Buttercup managed to dodge. After all, he was very clever. He jumped aside. Lime was watching him closely and thought that was it possible that he was able to deflect his blow, and did not even suffer at the same time. Apparently, Buttercup managed to make a strong impression on Lime. He's getting more and more interesting. Now it was not just a competition, but a real battle. They collided, and in this collision Buttercup's sword broke. And when they recoiled again in different directions, Buttercup looked at his sword, which was broken into two pieces, and threw it aside, as he realized that it would be useless in battle. Lime, of course, saw this, but did not comment on his action in any way. However, he also put away his own sword. After all, he believed that it would not be a fair fight, but wanted to defeat a friend in a fair fight. Buttercup was very surprised by this and looked questioningly at his friend. He had not expected this in any way. Lime paid no attention to Buttercup's reaction and thought that the Dark Knight's magic was tied to shadow illusions, and yet he wants to fight him on equal terms. Apparently, Lime really respected his friend. He wants to fight him without any illusions and deception. What would he say to that? Buttercup told him that he decided to use one of his magic tricks, didn't he? Lime said don't let him get it wrong. He's not going to use dark magic against him. He wants to fight him face to face. Buttercup was happy about this. Apparently, he himself was thinking the same thing. He said come on. Their battle became more and more interesting every time. Even the audience did not shout anything. Everyone was captured by this spectacle. Buttercup released his power and told him to take a chance. Lime smiled a little. It was very interesting and exciting for him to fight with someone who is on the same level with him. The judge was so scared that he could no longer be on the battlefield, so he decided to leave it. And Lime and Buttercup continued their battle. They rushed to each other. Buttercup looked surprised and thought how strange it was. They might be fighting in earnest right now, but for some reason he's having so much fun. He's sure Lime wants to win, but he doesn't want this fight to end. With each new blow, he feels himself getting stronger and stronger. It's just unbelievable. And at that moment they hit each other. There was a strong impact of their forces. Both guys flew off in different directions, but they stayed on their feet. Lime looked slightly puzzled and thought, "What is this?" Did he? He looked at Buttercup and thought that did he really level up during the fight with him? That's exactly what happened. But Lime wasn't happy about it at all. Did he think it was bad? So he can lose to him after all? Then he shouted at Buttercup to attack. However, Buttercup didn't even move. But Lime didn't hit it either. Once behind him, he turned around to look at him, and he saw something very strange. This greatly strained and frightened him, and at that moment Buttercup found himself next to him and tried to strike. However, Lime managed to dodge. He thought that just now, he had just used the Dark Knight's supreme skill called stopping time, hadn't he? It wasn't his imagination, was it? He replayed this moment in his head and thought that he had really discovered this ability so soon. And if that's the case, then in order to defeat him, he will have to use all his strength. Now their battle was getting more and more serious, and also more dangerous, but none of them wanted to give up and make concessions, so they continued their fight. Lime tried to hit Buttercup, but he made a block, and as soon as Lime got to the right distance, he smiled and grabbed his hand. Buttercup told him he was caught, but Lime was not so simple either, so something that Buttercup was up to, he couldn't pull it off. He looked at Lime with surprise and a bit of horror and asked what. He wondered if he really wasn't there. Was it really his illusion? He began to look around in order to find Lime. However, it was right behind him, and from there he struck a strong blow. So Buttercup was slammed into a stone wall. Then he fell to his knees and lost consciousness. The referee finally entered the battlefield and said that Lime was the winner of the tournament. Lime did not react to his victory in any way. He approached Buttercup. He smiled at him, even though he was unconscious and couldn't see it, and said that he had become much stronger. After that, the magic tournament came to an end. Then there was the award ceremony. Lime was awarded by the headman of the council himself. On either side of the prefect stood Mylene and teacher Eddie. The headman was holding in his hands the cup with which he was supposed to award Lime now. Mylene was clearly unhappy with Lime's victory. She bowed to him and said through her teeth that she congratulated him on his victory. Eddie's teacher was so angry that he couldn't say anything. He was shaking all over from this anger. He barely held on so as not to explode. Lime just smiled sweetly at them and thanked them. The headman handed him this cup and said that this trophy was his by right. Lime accepted this gift. The headman said that a little later he would be summoned to a personal audience with King Deer, and he would personally present him with a prize. Lime shuddered. When he heard this, he was very happy. He thought that finally, what he had been planning for so long turned out. And he said to his old age that it was good. He understood. Then he turned around and said that then he would go. But then the headman shouted for him to stop. He looked at him sternly and told him to answer him. Who is he? Lime turned to old age and looked at him in bewilderment, asked what was he talking about. The headman said that the first-year student who won the magic tournament, and who defeated the strongest students of their academy. And it's also not an understatement to say that he definitely stands out from everyone else. Hearing this, Eddie's teacher already turned away. He couldn't even look at this young man. But what the headman would say next shocked teachers Eddie and Mylene. The headman told Lime that, and also he thinks that he has already realized that in this tournament he was tried to be killed countless times. Hearing this, teacher Eddie and Mylene shuddered and looked questioningly at the head of the council. And the rest of the students, who were sitting in the stands and watching all this awarding, were also very surprised by this. They immediately began to talk about it. The headman of the council said that those who planned it would be punished very severely. And he, of course, is also waiting for this fate, because he did not stop them, although he had to do it. He bowed his head to Lime and said that he sincerely apologized to him for having to go through all this hell. Lime realized that the old man really regretted it, but he wasn't mad at him because he knew who had planned it all. So Lime told him not to apologize. After all, he fought for victory in this tournament and is glad that he was able to challenge such a difficult opponent. He looked at the headman of the council and thought that this Grandpa Mac, he does not remember him as a game character, but he gives the impression of a very good person. Hearing Lime's words, all the students froze and held their breath. They were very surprised by what he said. After that, the head of the council said that then he wanted to know his personal opinion, what was missing from their magic academy. Lime really thought about it, and told him to give him some time to think. The academy accepts students of any race. However, as soon as he found himself within these walls, he saw absolutely the opposite of the stated attitude. He remembered all the hurtful words that Eddie's teacher had said to him. As soon as Lime entered this academy, the teacher asked him that as such a scum, how could he enter their academy? Lime said that kobolds have no place to eat among demons, and he was underestimated by all the teachers just because he was born a goblin. And his friend, Buttercup, was bullied by classmates just because he was born kobold. And their entire magic academy is imbued with this spirit. However, he believes that the curriculum itself is pretty good. But discrimination comes from the very heart of this academy, starting with the dormitory by rank, and ending with teachers who discriminate against others based on race. From what Eddie and Mylene heard, the teacher became uneasy at all. After all, they understood that it was about them. Now they were shaking not from anger, but from fear. The headman of the council listened attentively to Lime, after which he said that this was how it was. Then first he should fire these two. Apparently, the head of the council himself understood who it was about. The headman thanked Lime and said that he would take all his words into consideration. Lime looked at Eddie and Mylene's teacher and grinned. Now he has gained the upper hand over them, and he could be proud of it. Eddie's teacher was shaking all over. He thought that he would really be fired. Mylene felt no better and thought that, but she had nothing to do with it at all. After all this chatter and awarding, Lime decided to meet Buttercup in the backyard. Buttercup was much better now. He congratulated Lime on his victory, and Lime thanked him and said that he was very glad that he was his final opponent. He fought just fine. Buttercup was very pleased to hear such praise, and he thanked Lime for it. He stretched out and said that fighting in the tournament was really a lot of fun. It is a pity that it has come to an end. Lime agreed with him and said that it was true. Then he turned to him and said that, by the way, he would like to ask him something. Buttercup was very happy when he heard about it and asked what to ask. He will do anything, let him just say. Lime was a little surprised by such a violent reaction and said that's how it is. After that, when they calmed down a bit, Lime said that he was actually going to leave the Magic Academy soon. Buttercup was not expecting this at all and asked what. He said that, however, he had entered here. But Lime interrupted him, because he understood what he wanted to say and told him that he had his own reasons for leaving this place. However, he will definitely come back here. He looked straight into his eyes and asked if he could promise him that he would be his ally for the rest of his life. Buttercup looked very surprised and asked what an ally. But they're already friends. Lime asked him if he could call him a friend if King Deer himself and his entire retinue declared him an enemy. Buttercup did not understand at all what Lime was driving at and asked what the king was doing. Why did he suddenly start talking about such a thing? Lime didn't explain anything to him. Apparently, he thought that this was not necessary yet, and asked him to promise him this. Buttercup was surprised at him, looked at him, then smiled and said that it was good. He held out his hand to him and said that he promised that no matter what happened, he would always be on his side. After that, the two friends shook hands. Lime was very grateful to him for such trust and thanked him. After which he said that, by the way, he wanted to praise him. His swordsmanship skills have improved markedly. After all, he won this tournament only at the expense of his tricks, and without this he would definitely have lost to him. Buttercup didn't look very happy when he found out about it and asked what had improved. Well, if he says so, then he will continue to train until the day when he will be able to fight with him again. Lime was about to leave and said they had an agreement. See you then. Buttercup waved to him too and said that yes, they would see each other again. After such a pleasant conversation with his friend, Lime finally left the Magic Academy, and then an unexpected surprise awaited him. Two girls ran up to him and hugged him from both sides, congratulating him on his victory. Lily smiled again and said that she did not expect anything less from her older brother. The fairy was only watching them. Miyu told him that he was so cool, and called him Mr. Lime. Lily continued to hold her brother's hand and, raising her eyes full of admiration at him, said that she would tell everyone in the village how he defeated everyone at once. Miyu grabbed his other hand and asked him that he was going to the village with them, right? Lime patted Miyu on the head and, laughing, said that thank you for coming to support him. All this time they were being watched by Lety, who hid behind a tree not far from them. She was very shocked by what she saw and thought, who are these children? What are they doing here anyway? They can't study here, and anyway, why is she sitting here and hiding? She completely hid behind a tree and, clutching her head, thought that she wanted to congratulate him on his victory. At that moment, the system connected again, which said that the quest called Awakening had been upgraded to level 4, and the range of Lime's magic skills has also been expanded, and a new unique skill called Fast Movement was available. Goblin Village. After all his adventures, Lime finally returned back to the village. Lime looked very happy, but said that it seemed like he hadn't been here for just a week, and it felt like a year had passed. Seeing Lime, the children were very happy. One of them shouted that the brother was back. After that, everyone else joined in. The girl went up to the other goblins and shouted to them that her brother savior had returned. A little boy ran up to him and asked him to play with them. After that, they surrounded him and began to bombard him with various questions. One of them asked what kind of strange clothes are these? Another said she looks really cool. Lily and Mia were very happy about all this, and Lime felt uncomfortable. Someone shouted that Lily and Mia were back too, but that Lime's attention was attracted by the headman. He smiled at him and pointed with his finger, pointing to his house. The goblins worked tirelessly. The men cultivated a vegetable garden and extracted water from a well. They could also arrange picnics for her, resting from all worries and affairs. The village headman looked very happy watching all this and thought that their trees had started to flourish, and it was all thanks to Lime. His advice on improving the quality of life in the village was very helpful. Lime also drew attention to how the village has changed. These changes made him very happy. Lime came to the house in his old age and said that the land in their village was very infertile. There was not enough water and fertilizers to grow crops, hence their lack of food for all the villagers. He asked him why did they decide to settle here? The headman said they didn't really have much choice. Their people are persecuted by everyone wherever they go. He doesn't even know what to do. Do you really start looking for a new land again? But Lime told him that no, and the comma is not worth it. When he examined their village, he understood why they had problems with farming. This land was cursed by someone intentionally. The headman was very frightened by his words, and he asked what. Is he sure of this? Lime said that yes, there are magical seals all over the village that desecrate this land and pull the life out of it. Apparently, he noticed them one more time when he came here. And this seal was not one, there were several of them around the perimeter of the village. Starost, you couldn't believe it and asked what about. Lime said he thought it wasn't Goblin who put those seals on. In order for them to be able to farm again, it is necessary to destroy these seals, and then these lands will become fertile. The headman was very surprised and asked, what can he destroy them? Lime said that of course, he has to rely on him. So after this conversation, he immediately went outside and started looking for the seal. When he found it, he thought that in order to destroy all the seals, he immediately needed to destroy the largest seal that hangs over the village. Based on the materials of the game, goblins have almost no magic. I don't think anyone in the settlement can know such a powerful spell. Someone deliberately drove the goblins into this trap and forced them to live on this land, but did not even give them a livelihood. Lime took out his sword and thought that whoever it was, after which, he swung his May ball and destroyed this seal. And I thought that whoever it was, he would pay for it. He turned to the old age that stood behind him, said that everything would be fine in the village now. Their land is no longer cursed, the water spring near the village will soon be restored. Then Lily told him that, by the way, since my brother is here, we are cooking to visit them. You asked him if he wanted to try their new dishes. When the little goblin heard this, they were very happy and shouted that there was food. They'll have a feast. Lime smiled at them and said yes, with pleasure. So after this and that, the goblins threw a big feast. That's how Lime's weekend in the goblin village went. The food that Lily and Mew cooked was really delicious. On this day, smiles decorated the faces of the townspeople. He thinks that seeing them, the goddess would be pleased. The goblin goddess, in which she was watching them, sighed and said that it was if only a little. The next morning came. Lily and Mew burst into the house to Lime, who had not yet gone outside. The girls joyfully burst into his house and called out to him. Lime was already fully assembled and, turning to them, wished them good morning. Then he said that it was time for him to return to the academy. Lily was very upset and asked what's what. Is it really so soon? Mew also looked very upset and said that he had only arrived at their place yesterday. Lime explained to them and said that he still had unfinished business at the academy, but thanks to their care, he was able to have a good rest. Lily was very happy about this and, laughing, said that there was nothing for it. Mew, lowering her head, said that since he was leaving, then. After which she handed him a small gift. Lime accepted it and asked what it was. Mew told him that she would make bracelets with Lily. Lily said it was an amulet. He will protect him from everything bad. Lime was very pleased to receive such a gift, and he asked what is it like, and thank his girls for this gift, and immediately put it on his hand. Lily said she was very glad he liked it so much. Mew said you shouldn't be grateful, really. After that, Lime got ready to go. Lily and Mew realized that Lime was going to get ready now, so they decided not to distract him anymore and went to the exit. Already at the door, Lily told him that then see you later. Mew said they would be looking forward to his return. After that, the girls went about their business, leaving Lime with the fairy. The fairy looked at him and asked that he would go to an audience with King Deer, wouldn't he? She warned him and said that it would be very difficult to defeat him. But Lime wasn't scared at all. He was still looking out the window and told Faye not to worry about it. Does he already have a plan? He knows everything about him, all his techniques and fighting style, so he definitely won't lose to him. The fairy looked at him carefully and said that how strange. After all, she is almost sure that the goddess did not grant him the power of clairvoyance. And I asked him what then, how did he know everything about him? She flew closer to him and asked, what, is he really a goblin? Liam was surprised by this question and, laughing, said yes, he's just an ordinary goblin. And now it's time for them to have an audience with the king. Meanwhile, on the magic continent in the castle of King Deer, his castle was simply huge, but very gloomy. In the castle of King Deer, the throne room, the king was sitting on his throne, in the same gloomy and dark throne room as his castle itself. He grinned and said that the boy was a goblin who had won a magic tournament. This is very interesting. It was obvious from him that he was looking forward to meeting Lime. Lime said that before going to King Deer, they would try out a new skill called rapid movement. The fairy did not understand him and looked at him questioningly. She asked what's fast what. Lime didn't explain everything to her now, and that's why he said that she would see everything for herself now. Only first she needs to get into his pocket. The fairy did not ask him any more questions and silently flew into his pocket. After that, a system window opened in front of him, and when he found what he needed, Lime said that, and now they will click here. After that, his quick move skill worked. They moved to Sierra's dorm in Lime's room. They were right in Lime's room in front of the window. The fairy immediately leaned out of his pocket, because she was very interested to see if Lime had succeeded. She sighed and said that he had also mastered teleportation. She said it as if she wasn't surprised at all and asked, what? Why isn't she even surprised at that? Lime was glad that he managed to move, because it was really very convenient. He didn't pay attention, or maybe he just ignored the fairy's words. He was lost in thought again and thought that he could teleport to any place where he had been before. In the game, this is a common thing, but in this world it is not worth showing everyone such a skill. Lime told Faye that he really needed to pick up the invitation to the audience, and now it's time to go. He reached for the table where the invitation lay, and when he took it, they immediately went on their way. Meanwhile, in the castle of King Deer, the main gate was protected by his guards, and just the same Lime needed to get there. Lime had already come here and was moving towards the gate. That guard noticed him and shouted for him to stop. He asked who was coming. When Lime came closer to him and the guard saw that he belonged to the goblin race, he said that such an inferior demon as he did not belong here, so he has to get out of here. Then Lime calmly showed him his ID card, which should allow him to pass without any problems, and asked if they wouldn't even let him through with that. The man carefully studied this piece of paper. When he realized that this was the same pass, he was very surprised and asked what. He apologized to Lime and told him to go through. Lime said nothing to the guard and silently entered the king's castle. Then Lime went into the great hall. The hall was very spacious and had high ceilings, but because of this it was very uncomfortable and uncomfortable. There were also tall stone columns. He began to look around and thought that, as expected, from the castle of one of the 7 generals of the Demon King, a very impressive view. The fairy was still sitting in his pocket and asked him if he had come to look at the views of the castle or what. Lime said it wasn't, and she knows it perfectly well. He was just curious because this is the first time he visits such a place. And he added, saying that he was just trying to distract himself a little. Apparently, Lime was actually very worried about the meeting with the king, so he even dreamed a little. The fairy flew out of his pocket and said yes. It was said with a bit of sarcasm, as if she didn't believe him. But then someone caught Lime's attention. He looked carefully in that direction and realized that these were the king's butlers. Apparently, he went out to meet him when he found out that he had come. It was already an elderly man. The butler didn't even look at him, but he bowed to him and said that they were waiting for him. He pointed to a large door and said that they were here. The fairy was already sitting in Lime's pocket. She hid there as soon as the butler came out to meet them, so she immediately hid again in Lime's pocket. After all, it was impossible for her to be discovered. Lime tightly clenched his hand into a fist. Apparently, he was really very worried before meeting such a cruel king. And then he told the fairy to listen to him. If everything doesn't go according to plan, then she should fly away from here as soon as possible. Perhaps he was very worried that his plan would fail, but he really didn't want anyone to get hurt for him. But the fairy was not going to leave him, even if the situation got out of control, and told him not to talk nonsense, because she could also help in general. Then the butler opened the big door and invited Lime there. The butler silently walked ahead, leading Lime straight towards the king. This place was as uncomfortable as the hall he entered, but it was also very dark here. Meanwhile, at the central gate, the guard had already relaxed, so it took him a while to notice that someone had come here again. Apparently, as always, the work was hard, and he was already noticeably tired. Someone has come to the castle again. It was some strange person who was hiding his face, so it wasn't even clear who he was. But this man was strange, so it's unlikely that he came here to help someone. And besides, it's a very strange coincidence, because Lime came here just a few minutes ago, so everything was very strange. He approached the guard and said that he was asking for forgiveness, thereby drawing the guard's attention to himself. After all, the guard did not immediately notice him. The guard immediately started up and asked what, and he, who else is he? This strange man said that the student who had just entered the king's castle had prepared a gift for him. Apparently, he decided not to waste time and immediately got down to business. He said that, but apparently he was very worried and forgot it in his room, and asked if he could pass it on. The guard was surprised and asked what's what. However, he did not object and told him to go only very fast. The strange man said that it was good, and he grinned. Apparently, this man knew Lime's plan and intentions perfectly well, so he decided to stop him. After all, this is a very strange coincidence. Meanwhile, Lime had already arrived at the throne room, where the king was waiting for him. The butler did not accompany him further, so now he was walking alone. He was walking along a very long corridor. There were also very high ceilings and tall, stone columns. Lime looked very tense and thought that in the game this place was a battlefield with a very dangerous boss of the game. Lime smiled and thought he finally got to him. Apparently, despite all the fear, he was internally glad that everything should end soon. The king greeted him and said that he was welcome, although he still had that nasty grin on his face. He was one of the generals of the Demon King's army and his name is the Cruel King Deer. Lime clenched his whole body and looked at King Deer. He thought that he had fought him very often in the game, but it felt very different in person. After which he bowed to the king and thanked him for inviting him. He told the king that he was a student from the Academy of Magical Arts, a goblin named Lime. The king said he knew who he was, and he also watched all his fights at this tournament. And I asked him if he really came from the goblin race. Apparently, he was very impressed with Lime's fighting skills, and the fact that he is a goblin surprised him very much, since goblins are the weakest monsters. Lime looked straight at the king and said that was right. The king asked, "What is it like?" He said that, and he did not know that goblins have such outstanding strength. There was a feeling that he said it in order to hurt Lime with it once again. Lime did not pay any attention to this and told him that he trained every day in order to achieve such results. This surprised the king even more, and he asked what himself. Did he even master the dark arts on his own? Apparently, the strength of Lime really impressed him. Lime said it was. The king thought for a moment and began to examine Lime very carefully. Lema stood quietly and looked at him. After a short silence, the king sighed and said that well, okay. Apparently, he was already tired of it all, because he found out everything he wanted to know, so he moved on to the most interesting. He also added, saying that it would be better for him if he joined their army in the future. Strong fighters like him are very much needed by their kingdom, and also according to the rules of this tournament, he is obliged to give him a rare treasure. He pointed his finger at the treasures that were already displayed on the nondescript and dark wall of the castle, and told him to choose anyone. There were several such precious treasures hanging on the wall. Apparently, the king had prepared in advance for his visit, so everything was already ready. One of these treasures was the cursed Erendit sword. There was also a powerful shield from the demonic wing, the magical armor of the chain of Hades. Lime stared intently at these treasures and thought that all these things were legendary weapons that could be knocked off a boss with a low chance of attack. But it was impossible to tell from his expression that he was impressed by these treasures, but he had no choice but to play along. He appreciated them all and thought that, however, he didn't really need it now. What then should he choose? He was not allowed to attract attention to himself, so he had to play along with the king further. But he did not think long and told the king that then he would take the Erendit sword. The king raised his right hand up and said that it was good. After that, he called this weapon directly to himself. Holding this sword in his hands, he turned to Lime and told him to come here and take his reward. Lime immediately approached the king and held out his hands to accept his reward. But then something happened that Lime could not have expected. The king told him that, by the way, he forgot to tell him something. Lime raised his eyes to the king and looked at him questioningly. The king said that when he became king, he ordered the servants to use a special stone to decorate his throne room. Lime looked tense, but he listened to the ruler in silence. The king decided to come from far away and said that the power of this stone is very simple. When a demon with bad intentions enters the throne room, the stone lights up red, and then Lime realized that he had fallen into a trap. After all, it's true, when he came in, the stones lit up red. Lime looked surprised and scared at the same time. And the king, while Lime was confused, grabbed this sword and was about to plunge it into him, but still managed to react in time and jumped aside. However, this sword was not an easy weapon. It had a very strong shockwave. Several columns were destroyed, and Lime was also slightly damaged. Still, the king managed to hurt him. Lime clutched her wounded side and, looking at the king, thought that from the very beginning he had fallen into his trap. The king rose from his throne and looked arrogantly at the wounded Lime. He praised him and said that it was really good. He was able to react so quickly to his blow. He's really very good. However, such a dangerous element must be destroyed. Apparently, from the very beginning of Lime's appearance in the Magic Academy, the king already wanted to destroy him. After which, he waved his hand, ordered his soldiers to kill him. After that, monsters crawled out of all the cracks in this hall. They climbed out of the walls, from the ceiling and even from the floor. There were a lot of them, and they were all very dangerous monsters. Lime was completely surrounded, and besides, he was also wounded. The king shouted to him to stand where he was. He again humbled him with an arrogant look and said that he could at least fight in hysterics and beg him for mercy. However, for such thoughts, he will be punished even worse than death itself. Lime was slightly surprised by this statement. However, afterward, he even chuckled and told the king not to misunderstand him. He wasn't going to beg him for mercy, and since he knew about his intentions, then there is no point in hiding them anymore. Lime was completely surrounded by these terrible and dangerous monsters, but so far they have not moved, apparently waiting for the order of their ruler, and Lime wasn't scared at all. He looked confidently at the king and said that he had come here for his head, and after his death, this territory will belong to him. The king did not like what he heard very much. He frowned and asked that he was serious now, wasn't he? Lime was not a bit afraid of his views and said that of course. He shrugged his shoulders and mimicked the king himself, saying that, of course, he could be hysterical and beg him for mercy. But it wouldn't work on him either. Now the king was very serious. He might have spared Lime before, but now he couldn't forgive him for that. His eyes already lit up. He grinned and called him an impudent boy. Lime remained unwavering and told the king to attack. After that, the king shouted to his subordinates to finish him off, and only after the order of their ruler, all the monsters immediately rushed after Lime's head. Lime immediately began to dodge their attacks. He turned to the fairy who had been sitting in his pocket all this time and told her to cure him. After all, such a wound, he really can't do anything with these monsters. Not only will he not be able to kill them, but he will also be able to stand up for himself. However, all this time, sitting in Lime's pocket, she was already trying to heal him. She said that she would really like to help him, but she couldn't. Perhaps it was all about this demonic sword. However, Lime was not at a loss and said that he understood her. It's all because of the debuff of bleeding that the demonic sword Arendit imposes. So he kept dodging all the attacks of these scary and powerful monsters. He thought that in the game for the battle with King Deuros, whole raids were collected, because one player could not cope with such a crowd of monsters. Lime jumped onto one of those tall and stone pillars. However, this did not greatly improve his situation. After all, there were also monsters that could fly, and the monsters that moved on the ground, too, did not sit out their pants. They immediately surrounded this column, and some began to climb it. Lime saw it all perfectly, but he couldn't think about it right now. He thought that in order for him to get to the king, it was necessary to deal with his soldiers. However, he didn't look scared now, but on the contrary, he concentrated his dark magic in the palm of his hand and said that even if he was alone, he had the strength of a whole raid. After that, he directed his dark magic directly at the monster, which had almost climbed up to him. But then something caught his attention. Monsters not only climbed up the column to him, but also destroyed it. He thought they decided to get to him by destroying the pillars, didn't they? So Lime jumped to the next column, and the previous column immediately fell to the ground. The monsters completely destroyed it. However, here he faced another problem. One of these monsters flew up to him right behind his back, and was about to strike at him. However, Lema foresaw this and disappeared for a moment, forcing the monster to stand in a stupor. Meanwhile, Lime has already jumped to the next column. Well, now 3 of their same monsters flew to him at once, and now Lime has decided to deal with them with the help of his dark magic and called shadow threads. His magical threads bound the legs of these monsters, and after that Lime began to spin them, and when he spun them enough, he just let them go. and then he proceeded to destroy other monsters that were on the ground. The king, who had been just watching the slaughter all this time, was clearly unhappy with this result. He clearly didn't expect Lime to be able to do anything against his army, so now he and Lime have switched places. If at the very beginning Lime looked scared and cornered, now King Deer looked like that. He asked what the hell. However, unlike all these monsters, Lime clearly enjoyed it. He grinned and asked who would be next. Naturally, the battle was not over yet. It wasn't even the beginning. This battle promised to be very long, bloody and dangerous, but neither side was going to give up, and especially Lime, because it's not the first time he's faced difficulties, and he's already used to coping with them. But now the battle was a little easier for Lime, unlike how it began, because then he was attacked from all sides at once, and besides, he was already wounded. After a short period of time, Lime dealt with another small group of monsters, and now it was cleared under him so that Lime calmly went down. But still, the monsters were not finished yet. However, when they saw that Lime had finally descended and could now be easily touched, the monsters immediately activated. One of them apparently thought he could catch Lime by surprise and decided to attack him from behind. He had even gotten close enough to him and had already swung his weapon in order to deliver a fatal blow and finally finish him off. But Lime saw him from the very beginning, so he turned around abruptly and struck first, thereby killing this monster, after which he took out his sword and jumped onto one of the pillars again. Apparently, he decided to use the old method again. The king, who was just watching this, but was not going to interfere himself, apparently grinned at the battle and said what he was waiting for. Apparently, he was very amused that Lime was running away from his monsters like that, but he didn't want to look at this running around forever. Lime did not pay any attention to his words, but then he had not yet managed to land on the ground, and one of the monsters had already jumped after him and even already raised his weapon to strike. It was a very tense moment. Apparently, Lime himself was scared and tensed, but did not show it. He reacted immediately. However, Lime was able to cope with it. He used his magic called Fireball, so he easily dealt with this monster. Unlike the monsters who just thoughtlessly waved their weapons, Lime acted deliberately and focused, because not only his life depended on it, but also the lives of the Goblin village, so he could not give up. And then he finally landed on one of the pillars and felt solid ground under him. But, of course, he didn't have time to rest even a little, because those annoying monsters had already arrived for him. And the monsters from below were also not far behind. They were already climbing up to him, and also tried to destroy this stone column. The flying monsters surrounded him again, but Lime jumped to the next column again. His movements were light and fast. However, monsters began to climb this column and destroy it. So also those pesky flying monsters that were constantly circling above him, and they could attack him at any moment, so there was no delay. The king grinned and said that he would not be able to escape forever. He was very amused by all this, but he himself was in no hurry to take part in the battle. Apparently he was so confident in his subordinates, and was unfaithful in the strength of Lime. Lime understood this perfectly well, but apparently he had his own plan, which he researched. So at that moment, he dealt with another monster that had already climbed up the column and was trying to attack him. The following monsters began to climb after him, so it was dangerous for Lime to stay here. He himself was already barely holding on, apparently, and the wound also began to hurt again. Fatigue was taking its toll. It was really forever running. He was already exhausted, and the wound that the king had inflicted on him at the very beginning was making itself felt, so it was getting harder and harder for him to move around. Apparently, he wouldn't last long, but he couldn't give up either, especially now that he was almost at his goal. The king was clearly enjoying the sight. Yes, and he also noticed that Lime was very tired and was already holding on. He asked him what was wrong with him. Already exhausted, isn't it? And he began to mock him. Then the next batch of monsters came to him just in time. It feels as if there was no end to them, no edge. He killed them, but more came in return. However, Lime was not going to give up. He raised his eyes full of courage and told King Deer that he thought their battle was already moving towards the end. The king laughed loudly and said that it was so. Apparently, everyone had something on their mind, and each of them was confident of their victory. None of them wanted to stay here for long. The king said that he would kill him very soon. After his words, his subjects began to climb the column even more actively. They seemed to become angrier and even more aggressive. There was a very strong crush. The monsters were crushing each other just to get on the column and finish off Lime. And Lime himself already had a plan ready. He thought that he had purposely avoided all of their attacks. Then he turned to the king and said that the jokes were over, and I asked him what he would say to that. After that, he used his dark magic again. But this time he decided to act a little differently. He used his dark magic again, and it illuminated all this dark and huge room, which was crowded with monsters. He used his dark magic called Goblin Kinship. He closed his eyes and began to chant. He said that, following the light because of this impenetrable darkness, he must come to his call and fulfill his order. He was summoning the Goblin King. After that, a real Goblin King appeared in front of them, and the first thing he said was that he hadn't been needing bones in the world of the living for a long time. He looked very reserved and cool-headed. King Deer clearly could not have expected this. He became even angrier, because everything was not going as he had planned. The appearance of some Goblin King was not in his plans in any way. He asked what, and who else is this? He turned directly to Lime and asked what. That is, he summoned one goblin in order to stand up against all his generals. Didn't he? This made the king laugh a lot, and he said how funny he was. But Lime was not at all offended by the words of this king. He did not even pay any attention to it. And he said, well, it's the Goblin King, and the king always has his servants. After that, the Goblin King struck with his staff and goblins began to appear right out of the floor. A whole army of goblins. And everyone knows that even though goblins are the weakest race on this continent, however, when they act in a large group, they are very difficult to defeat. So now King Deer clearly has big problems. The king was at a loss. He asked if the summoned spirit could summon someone else. Lime grinned and said that, and he decided to beat him with numbers. But he's a goblin, and goblins are only strong when they are united. An army of his generals against a whole army of goblins. Let the bloodbath begin. After that, the two sides ruthlessly rushed at each other. One of King Deer's monsters killed one goblin, but he was immediately surrounded by several goblins who stabbed him with their swords. Goblin archers opposed flying creatures. They aimed very accurately, so just a few arrows allowed them to get rid of these monsters. The monsters were clearly losing a whole army of goblins, and after some time, King Deer asked with horror that did all his soldiers shoot some goblins. Apparently, this hurt him very much, because he was the king, and his army was killed, according to most, the weakest race on this continent. So now King Deer lost his temper. The Goblin King had done his job, so he turned to Lime and said he was very happy to help him. That was the end of his work here, so it was time for them to return. After that, the Goblin army and the Goblin King himself disappeared. They disappeared as suddenly as they appeared here. But Lime was very grateful for the help, because now it will be much easier for him. So now there's only Lime and the king left. Lime stood in front of the king and asked what. Well, now they will move on to round 2, won't they? The king couldn't stand it and called him names. Now there is nothing left of the former, cold-blooded King Deer. And rage and anger have always been the worst opponents during a fight. Unlike him, Lime was very calm, because he was confident in his victory. King Deer said he told him that he would make him beg for mercy. The king finally got up from his throne and was already fully dressed for battle, said that he had not killed anyone with his own hands for a long time. Lime grinned and said he would take it as a compliment. After that, the king released his power outside. He was really very strong. The whole earth shook. Lime was tense. He thought he was really strong. Already the air in the hall became much heavier from his dark magic. And if that's the case, then it's time for him to show what he's worth. Lime was about to use his dark magic again. However, his wounds haven't healed yet, although he did not show it. But it was really very hard and painful for him. For the first time, the fairy looked very worried. She was very worried about Lime and said that his wounds. What an idiot he is, he hasn't recovered yet. Lime thought that this was impossible. And all this is due to the bleeding that demonic sword Arendit imposes. And if that's the case, then he must defeat him until his strength finally runs out. He must give his all in order to finally defeat the king. But the fight promised to be very difficult, because Lime was already battered by the battle with his servants. But he wasn't going to give up either. He summoned his sword, and they crossed their blades. Both were very strong, so the whole earth began to shake. All the big stone columns began to collapse. Stones rained down from above, but none of them paid any attention to this, because both were absorbed in the battle. Lime looked very collected and tense, and the king, on the contrary, was very amused by it all. It was a battle for him, and it really didn't cost anything. After all, she thought that he would easily deal with him. It was just entertainment for him. And then the king summoned his flame, and decided to attack Lime with it. However, Lime managed to dodge his attack in time. But it was just a distraction. And while Lime was dodging this attack, the king was about to attack him again. He shouted to him that he was caught, and then he fired his blade at him. And now Lime did not have time to dodge, and the blade directly pierced his left arm. It went right through his elbow. Lime stopped and grabbed his injured arm. He looked closely at the king, and only now saw, and thought that did he really have 4 hands. But the truth is, apparently, at some point King Deer decided to act seriously, because it was a life and death battle. But he didn't have such a design in the game. It really knocked him out of his rut. Lime thought that, and when using fire magic, the king throws the target into a gravitational cage, from which it is simply unrealistic. And then while he was thinking about it, he just fell into this trap. He found himself in the same cage, and I thought I'd get out. Lime looked very scared, and then a huge fiery explosion followed. The king chuckled. After all, I was sure that Lime was finally defeated. But when all the dust finally settled and the whole picture was revealed, he tensed up again. But I really did not expect this, because no one else could resist after such a powerful attack. Lime, though barely standing on his feet, was still alive. He pulled out that blade that had pierced through his left arm. Blood was oozing out in his hand and dripping directly onto the floor. The king asked if he was still alive, right? Is he really a goblin? Not for the first time, someone doubts that he is a goblin. Lime threw this blade aside and, smiling, asked, is it really so hard to believe it? And he himself thought that he had almost no strength left. He did not expect that the battle against this king would be so difficult for him. The king said he was even curious how much longer he could hold out against him. For the king, it was just a game. Unlike Lime, for whom it was a real struggle. But when the king realized that Lime was not so simple, he decided not to hold back, to attack him in full force. He swung his blade again and was already hoping to overcome it. Even Lime was scared for a moment. After all, everything was so fast and unexpected. But still he was able to get away from his attack. But the king did not stop there, continued to attack him again and again. And then the king swung his sword again, and Lime, looking in this direction, thought that if he didn't steam away now, then EU for sure. He pulled out his sword again and blocked his attack. There was a strong collision. Lime couldn't stay on his feet, and his sword flew off to the side. He himself fell to the ground and coughed up blood. He had fallen into his trap again. Looking around, he thought that just not this, but he managed to jump aside in time. Even though it was hard for him, Lime could no longer stand properly on his feet. His battle with the monsters had already severely crippled him, and now he had to fight an opponent who was much stronger than the whole army he had defeated. But the king was only happy and asked him what was it. Was he already exhausted? Lime drew his sword again. The king was already preparing for the next attack and said that, and he had just started. Lime stared questioningly at the king and thought, what is he talking about? The king said he would admit it. He really is just a wonderful warrior. Throughout their battle, not for a second did he relax his vigilance. He followed his every move and perfectly dodged all his attacks. And as a sign of respect, he will show him all his might as a general of the demon army. This scared Lime so much that he already shuddered. He didn't expect this, and I thought, if that's what he's thinking. The king used his forbidden technique, which was called Satan's Ball. A fire vortex appeared in the middle of their battlefield. Lime thought that against his special technique, and even in this state, he would definitely not be able to cope. Now his gaze expressed complete despair. For the first time, Lime doubted his abilities, and I felt real fear. The fire vortex was already moving directly towards him. The king told him that this flame could not be extinguished. He'll burn it to the ground. Lime tried to hide from this flame and thought that his technique was not so powerful. He just needs to get to it. However, in this state, his wound started bleeding again. He bent over and clutched his wounded side. He was breathing heavily, barely able to stand on his feet. The fairy couldn't take it anymore and, leaning out of his pocket, told him to let her try to heal him again. It was also the first time she had been so worried about him. But the fairies should not have leaned out of their hiding place. The king immediately discovered her and said that, and here it is an annoying midge. After that, the fairy flew out of his pocket. She was carried away somewhere. Lime didn't have time to do anything, just clicked on the fairy. The fairy was almost pulled into this fiery vortex, but she managed to grab the rest of the stone column. But her strength was not enough to hold herself. The king shouted that he and all his servants would be crushed to powder. Lime felt destroyed. He thought no, he had to save her. However, he himself is at the limit. He should at least have a little. If only he had a little more mana, then he would definitely. But he heard a familiar voice and shuddered. He looked around and then someone fell on him. It was a girl in the same uniform as him. That is, she was from the Magic Academy. And it was Lety. Apparently, during the fall, she hit her head, so she shrank all over, and she began to rub the bruised place. Lime never expected to see her here. After all, he didn't even tell anyone that he would go here. He wanted to ask her what she was doing here. But Lety interrupted him and, looking at him with displeasure, asked that it was as if it was so important now. He'd better tell her, he's out of mana, isn't he? She had seen it all for herself, so there was no denying it. Lime looked away and said yes. If he had more mana, he would be able to stop his bleeding and get close to the king, but now But then Lety jumped up and interrupted him again, saying that since this was the case, then let the princess of the dark elves help him. Lime, who was still sitting and could not get up, stared at her and asked what. Lety said she would help him deal with the king. However, he owes a favor. After that, she concentrated and used her special technique called energy exchange. Lime immediately felt his strength returning to him. He began to examine himself in surprise and asked that she was sucking mana out of the environment and passing it to him, wasn't she? Flying itself began to lose strength because it was magic that consumed a lot of mana. She told him to remember he owed her. After that, she could no longer stand on her feet and fell. However, Lime arrived in time and picked her up. Then he turned his attention to his hand and asked what his wound was. He thought that this is how the special technique of the elf princess helps to draw mana not only from objects, but from her herself. She gave him everything she had, and therefore collapsed. Then the king made himself known again and shouted that he could not escape. This flame will overtake him wherever he hides. Lime gently put Lety on the floor and clenching his palm into a fist, said that thanks to her, he had now fully recovered. So the confidence returned to him again. He stood up again in the face of danger and said that he, too, was confident that he could kill this tyrant. Every technique has its weaknesses, and that's all it needs. He raised his hand and concentrated, and added that it would concentrate. While all this was happening, the fairy could no longer restrain herself. Her small hands fell off, and she flew straight into this fiery vortex. The king told them to die. He kept saying it over and over again. They should all die, these damn goblins. He growled again, releasing the last of his strength. Lime, on the other hand, remained calm and said that he needed to focus dark magic at one point for one precise strike. So he broke through the Demon King's fire vortex and reached right into him. Lime punched a hole in the king, and the king dropped dead. Lime looked at the dead king and said that he would admit it. Yes, Deer turned out to be much stronger than his game version. Lime was able to defeat him, so all these trials were now over. He could breathe a sigh of relief now. The fairy was already flying into the inferno. She already thought she was going to die. But at the last second Lime defeated King Deer, so all his dark magic also died with him. It was thanks to this that the fairy was able to survive. She fell to the ground and asked if she was really saved. She couldn't believe her eyes that everything had turned out this way. Lime immediately ran up to her, said that there was someone who needed to restore the mana reserve, and asked her if she could help. Lime was already holding Lety, who was still unconscious. The fairy flew up to them and said that yes, easily. For her heroes, nothing is a pity, and she began to restore Lety. Lime was very happy that he had won and watched Lety recover. Then system windows popped up in front of him. It was written in them that King Deer had been defeated. The quest called Awakening has been upgraded to level 5, and the range of magic skills has also been expanded. A unique skill called Light in the Dark was available, and he also had an additional reward, such as the Sword of King Deer. Arendit Lime studied all these system windows and said that this is a new unique skill. It seems that he even had his game character, but this is quite a powerful and useful spell. It will definitely be useful to him in future battles. He also said that plus he got Arendite and it's very good. Lime was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. He thought that the fight really turned out to be too hard, as he almost exhausted his entire mom. If it wasn't for Lety, he would have already. But he didn't have time to think, because Lety opened her eyes. The fairy was finally able to bring her to her senses. Lime immediately turned to Lety and said that she had woken up. The pilots are at 0 and said yes. Lime still held her in his arms and said that he had defeated King Deer. Lety was very happy about this and asked, "What is it like?" And she said that well. But then she blushed sharply and said that, and this, and she asked me to put it back in its place. From embarrassment, the girl even closed her eyes. Lime understood what she meant and, also very embarrassed, jumped aside and apologized to her. Lety got to her feet and said, "Come on." She dusted herself off and was still very confused by everything that had happened and said that everything was fine. And she herself thought that Lime was holding her in his arms more than once, but at least this time he did not send her flying. She remembered that battle with the Thunder Dragon again. Apparently, this had a very strong impression on her. Lime still could not approach her and called out to her. From surprise, the girl already shuddered and, turning to him, asked what is it. Unlike her, Lime had already gathered his strength and said that she had not told him what she was doing here. But then he lowered his head and said no. First of all, he wanted to thank her from the bottom of his heart. It was only thanks to her mana that he was able to defeat King Deer. Lime was really grateful to her for that. After all, he was even in despair and thought that they would not cope with him. He looked at her and, smiling, thanked her again. Lety was very happy that she was able to help him and said that he should not take it into his head. Although in fact she was very pleased that he thanked her. She told him that although she admits that she would never have thought that he would seriously attack the king, but he not only started a fight with him, he was also able to defeat him. Yes, just incredible. And she was confused again and thought that it seemed that with each meeting she was falling in love with him more and more. But the fairy was apparently very interested in what she wanted to say and asked what. And Lety came to her senses again and shouted that there was nothing. That's all she wanted to say. Lime came up to her and asked what and so why did she come here. Lety immediately took it very seriously and said it was a very long story. So after that, I started telling my story and said that, to tell the truth, she entered this academy for the same purpose as he did. This was very unexpected for Lime, and he asked what. Lety said she was a dark elf princess and had to avenge all her people. Lime said that, of course, he had heard that she was a princess. However, he remembered that at that time they said that the rumors were not lying. The dark elf princess herself arrived at the magic academy to enroll. Lime then paid attention to her. He looked at her questioningly and with surprise and thought that did they really want to say that Lety is a princess of the dark elves? And now that he remembered it, he told Lety that he didn't think it was true. Lety sighed sadly and said that yes, it was. Although she is a princess, however, her country no longer exists. Lime was shocked by this news and asked what she was talking about. Lety said that to be more precise, her country no longer belongs to the dark elves. They have become a puppet state. No, an ordinary slave colony. Lime wondered if the dark elves had become slaves. However, there was definitely no such thing in the game. After which Lety continued to tell her story. It was obvious that it was very difficult for her to tell all this, but she trusted Lime and, apparently, she also wanted to tell him everything. So she pulled herself together and said that her father, the ruler of their country, had made a deal with the Demon King in exchange for their most valuable resource, orichalcum. The Demon King promised to recognize their country as independent. But less than a year later, the Demon King terminated this peace treaty with them, and he also invaded their lands with an army of demons. The King of the Dark Elves, her father, was put into an artificial coma. He is still alive, however, due to a strong magic spell, he cannot wake up. In exchange for her father's life and safety, all the elves swore allegiance to the Demon King. Their king ruled the country for many centuries, and the people simply adored him. And that's why they couldn't throw him to his death. Not after all he's done for his people. Now their best magicians of the country are used as pumping out the magical energy of orichalcum. Lime listened carefully to her story and said it was just awful. However, why did she follow him to King Deer's castle? Lety said that her position no longer plays any role in her own country. She can't save her father and she can't run the country. For the sake of her people, for the sake of her father, she decided that she would take revenge on the Demon King. And she also said that this is why she entered the Magic Academy in order to meet King Deer. And she also really wanted to take away the Erendit sword from him. Lime looked at the girl. Apparently, he was not going to tell her that he had the sword now, and perhaps he would give it to her later. Lety, lowering her eyes, continued the story. Words were getting harder and harder for her, because everything that happened to her and her people was very hard to remember, and it was even harder to tell it to someone. But still, she said that this sword is able to free her father from eternal sleep, and if she had defeated King Dor, then she would have been able to take this sword and then. Apparently, she was very sorry that she could not do it, but still continued and said that even then she would have been able to free her people. With that, Lety finished her story and clenched her palm into a fist. It was very hard for her to talk about it, but she was able to do it. Lime looked at her and said that's how it was. Apparently, he himself was under the impression now, because Lety was always so joyful and smiling, but in fact everything turned out that way. Then Lety smiled at him again and said that, to be honest, she did not even expect that they had similar goals with him. It really surprised her a lot. Lime didn't say anything to her, but he also looked at her and smiled. Then Lety came up to him and said that, however, he was really too strong for an ordinary goblin. Apparently, she had been here from the very beginning and heard their entire conversation, and like everyone else who saw his strength, she was also impressed and could not believe that he belonged to the weakest race. She said she had a feeling there was a catch in something, and she looked at him as if she was waiting for an explanation from him. But then she said that, however, it is not so important, she thought, because she couldn't voice it out loud, that goblin or not, he was still her hero. The thought made her blush again. Lime just looked at her questioningly. It was as if he was waiting for some explanation from her. But then he remembered something and said that, by the way. Lety immediately started up. and she looked at him questioningly. Now she was listening to him attentively. Lime asked her what and who exactly is in power in her country now. Lety sighed again and said it was. His name is the Emperor of Dark Souls, and his name is Lick. But then something went clearly not according to plan. Someone came to them and not with the best intentions. Or maybe he was here from the very beginning and just waited. Lime was very scared for Lety and the fairy, so he called out to them and said that he was here. After which he took out his sword and stood up for Lety while the fairy hid in his pocket again. Apparently, Lime understood without words, and she herself was very scared. Apparently, the Emperor of Dark Souls himself appeared to them. He thought that he would never have thought that the so-called cruel King Deer would fall from some two youngsters. Most likely, he even had time to evaluate them already, so he knew what he was talking about. The Emperor of Dark Souls looked like a skeleton, or rather he was. And he was also very insidious and evil, so obviously nothing good is going to happen now. There was a very strong and dark energy coming from him, which Lime and Lety must have already felt. And that's why Lime was so scared for his friends. Although he himself is in the same position, but he did not think about himself, but immediately rushed to their defense. Lety was clearly not happy to see him here, and what is there to be happy about? And, apparently, she had already guessed who exactly it was, so there was nothing to be happy about here. She immediately turned to him and asked, what is he doing here? However, the Emperor of Dark Souls did not pay any attention to her, and did not answer her. He looked closely at Lime, who immediately attracted his attention, and thought that this guy was a goblin, wasn't he? But no, it's just not possible. Apparently, like everyone else, he also doubted that he belonged to goblins, because his strength was really impressive. He even assumed and thought that he was really a mutant. How curious it is. Lime was already focused and tense. He clearly did not like such a sudden visit from such an unusual and dangerous monster, and thought that this guy exudes so much dark magical energy. Apparently, he immediately felt it. And then I made a conclusion, thinking that he was also one of the generals of the army of the Demon King. Lety couldn't wait any longer, so using her magic, she pulled an arrow and told the Emperor of Dark Souls to respond immediately. Lime was very scared for the girl and shouted at her to stop. After all, he understood that all this was useless. He was much stronger than Lety. She would not be able to damage him, but would simply anger him. But it was too late, because Lety had fired some of her arrows at him. However, they all passed through this Emperor of Dark Souls. None of them hit him. Apparently, the Emperor of the Dead Souls knew that this would happen, so he didn't even flinch. He still didn't think to answer their questions, but only thought that they were dark elves. And they, as always, do not impress him with anything. Most likely, all these cramped elves are already noticeably tired of him. After that, he uttered some kind of spell that no one present except himself knew, and Lety was in serious danger. She was at the center of the seal that this Emperor of Dark Souls had placed. And also some mysterious forces began to constrain her movement, which also came out of this seal. Now she could not take a step. Lety was scared now. She knew it was bad. She already thought she was going to die, so she covered her face with her hands. However, Lime came to her rescue. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked what. Lime was already focused on the battle and told this Emperor of Dark Souls that he would not dare to harm his dear friend. Apparently, he had already guessed himself that this was the same Lick that Lety had told him about. The Dark Soul Emperor was very interested in this guy. Lime thought he remembered exactly where he had seen this magic circle. It was he who covered their entire goblin village, making the soil unproductive and drying up their rivers. The Emperor of Dark Souls not only captured Lety's homeland, but also did not allow the goblin to find his place. Meanwhile, Lepta was very embarrassed and blushed all over again. She thought that dear friend, what? The Emperor of Dark Souls thought that he was right after all. His colleagues completely underestimated his appearance. Maybe then make him your guinea pig. What would he say to that? Lime stared at the Emperor of Dark Souls and asked what. The Emperor of Dark Souls reached out directly to him with his bony hand and said that first he wanted to get rid of annoying bugs. And at that moment Lety fell behind Lime's back. Lime heard the sound and immediately turned around. Lety was seriously injured. The arrow of the Emperor of Souls pierced right through her body. After that, Lety disappeared in that very seal. The Emperor of Dark Souls turned to Lime and asked him if he hadn't noticed the flow of his mana. He knows himself. He's not the most ordinary demon he could have met. So, what choice will he make? Lime stared questioningly at the Emperor of Souls and asked, what is the choice? But what he saw in front of him shocked him. He asked that it was a portal, wasn't it? And this portal leads to the Goblin Village. Through the portal, he saw the entire Goblin Village on fire. The Emperor of Dark Souls pointed his bony finger at him and said whose life is more valuable. The goblins were terrified right now. Their entire village was burning to the ground. Many could no longer move and fell senseless. They were rushing back and forth, trying to save at least someone. Lime was very angry at this Emperor of Souls, and this Emperor himself apparently sought this.